This account pertains to my current upstairs neighbor. He disappears for weeks at a time, and then will suddenly hear what sounds like a slaughterhouse happening at 11 p.m. on a weeknight, announcing that he's now home. There's been a lot of things that have happened, but the top two that pretty much sum up everything you need to know about just how creepy this guy is this. One day I was bringing up groceries and he offered to help. I told him thank you and assumed that he would just take the bags to the second floor landing, place them outside the door, and then continue up to his apartment, like our other neighbor who has done this exact thing before. He follows me back out to my car and then stands about 4 inches behind me as I lean into the trunk of my car to get the last 2 bags. He takes all of the bags and then walks upstairs. As I finish saying the, "Oh, thank you, you really didn't have to do that," lines and unlock my door, he goes, "Oh, it's no problem. I know your old man leaves for work early and you're home alone." I barely open the door enough to walk into my apartment before I can turn around, and he's walked in. He opened up my fridge and puts the milk in, and he starts looking around our apartment and into our bedroom. And now, just for context of why I didn't flip out and start screaming, it was 8 in the morning and the 2 other people who live in our building were gone, so literally no one would have heard me. He's probably 6'2" and I'm 5'5" if I have on some thick shoes, and I say, "Okay, thanks for the help, I'll see you around." And he continues to dig through the fridge and looking towards my bed. Then he turns and starts stepping towards me, and then he realizes that I have a very large butcher knife 4 inches away from my hand, and then he chooses to leave. I call my husband, who's at work an hour away, crying, and tell him what just happened. That night he goes to confront the guy, and he won't answer the door. And so my husband goes up the next day, and the guy breaks down crying and tells my husband he doesn't remember anything and he's so sorry and he was just trying to be very neighborly. And my husband just tells him, "My wife's a tough girl and she can carry the groceries up herself." Sometime later we woke up one night hearing someone yelling and screaming outside. When we look out our living room window, we see the upstairs creeper with blood streaming down his face. He could barely stand, screaming at the police, "I'm not going to the damn hospital." Apparently, he had gotten into a fight at the pool hall down the street with 4 or 5 other guys and gotten his ass kicked. Eventually, the cops got a hold of him and took him to the hospital in cuffs. And the next morning, I went to go get groceries alone, and my husband didn't have to work that day. When I came home, he was standing outside smoking a cigarette, and you could tell that he was still messed up from whatever he was on the night before. This time, he walked straight up to the car and acted like he was waiting for me to get out, but he stood by the trunk. This was also the first time that I had seen him since the initial incident that he could have thought my husband wasn't home. I called my husband, and when he saw that I was on the phone and heard my husband coming down the stairs to the building, he took off running around the corner. My husband took me to the store that day and got me a gun. And now anytime he sees me alone, he just stares, but if my husband is around, he acts like he doesn't even see us. And now I know this might come across as a sort of dumb idiot just whining about her antisocial neighbors, but sometimes I get really scared being here whenever my husband isn't around, and since writing all of this down has made me feel just a little bit less alone, I guess it was worth it.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
I wanted to tell you guys about my mentally unstable neighbour, who I will be calling Kay to respect her privacy. Because I don't want to call her crazy or anything else that contributes to the stigmatism of severe mental illness, this story isn't going to be exaggerated to be more creepy than what it was. It's just what happened. Now, we had just moved into our new home, which we had recently built in a town in Texas. It started when my parents began finding small pills strewn about our backyard near the fences, just a few here and there. We googled the numbers on the pills to find most of them were antidepressants, but I can't remember the exact names, as this was about a year ago or so. But I think there was at least one pill that Google said was an antipsychotic medication. We were pretty confused, but mostly worried about our dog eating them before we could find them all. This kept happening over a few weeks, and then we found unopened water and Gatorade bottles thrown over our fence. The side of the house this was coming from had a somewhat empty lot next door. We had soon-to-be neighbours building their new house there, but it wasn't like the construction workers were throwing their trash over our fence. These bottles were unopened and full. For reference, Kay lives a few houses down from mine on the corner. Between our house and hers are 2 empty lots, the lot closest to us with a new house being built. After another week or so of this came the fights, or maybe incidents I should call them. Kay would routinely storm out of her house and go yell at the construction workers. I don't know what about, but apparently about nonsense things. Sometimes she would yell from her yard. Sometimes she would walk onto the lot to yell. Several times she was seen yelling at no one, just standing in the lot or walking around the construction supplies and arguing to herself. By now, most of the people on our street knew her and were afraid of her. Up to this point, I have never seen Kay. I attended university an hour away and was only home on the weekends. One weekend, my parents left me home alone in the middle of the day. I think they were at the gym or the grocery store. I'm an only child too, and I had just gotten out of the shower and walked downstairs to hear yelling. I took a look out the windows to see a middle-aged blonde lady arguing. I couldn't see who she was talking to, but I couldn't hear another male voice. Now, I had not met Kay yet, but I also hadn't met my new neighbours. So my first thought was that this was the new couple building next door, my new neighbours. It seemed like they were arguing about the house. After a few minutes, the blonde lady walked away, and then a couple came out of the unfinished house. They got into their car and parked on the street. I was really confused at this point, especially when the man walked over to my door and rang the doorbell. I'm very introverted, so I opted not to answer the door. Stupid, I know. My parents weren't home anyway, so it wouldn't have made a difference, I thought. After a minute, he walked back to his car, and from the window I could see he was sitting there on the driver's side doing something. He came back with a note that he left on my door, and then he and his wife drove away. After I was sure they were gone, I got the note and read it. Apparently my neighbours were checking out the house when they saw Kay, the blonde lady, attempting to get into my backyard. They confronted her, and that's what the yelling was. In a rush, I sent a picture of the note to my mum and called her, etc., but she didn't seem that worried about it. I knew that we always left the back door unlocked during the day, though. If she had gotten through our fence gates, she could have easily walked inside the house while I was home alone. After that, my stepdad got some new locks for the little gate doors at the front of our house. Things continued like this for a while, with Kay trying to get into our backyard, throwing pills and water bottles over our fence. A couple of times she was rummaging around our front flower beds too. And there was one instance which really unnerved my parents. We have a small alleyway that runs behind our house, connecting everyone's driveways. And another neighbor, who lives across the alleyway from us, contacted my parents to let them know they had seen Kay looming around our back fence at 3 a.m. that night. Not sure why those neighbors were awake at that time, but they said Kay was just standing there in the middle of the alleyway, staring at our back fence. Knowing we had someone essentially casing our house in the middle of the night, it was really starting to freak us out. The guy who built our house, who I'm naming Jay, somehow got in contact with someone who knew Kay's family pretty well. Everyone was wanting answers as to why Kay was acting like this, and since Jay had built most of the houses in the area and was well connected, people were asking him. I think he was friends with the realtor who sold the house to Kay, but I'm not sure. But Jay was able to give us a lot of information about her. Apparently her family was rich and owned a very big corporation, like one of the biggest in the US. And her family had essentially placed her in this house, away from the rest of them, as they didn't want to deal with her mental illnesses. But more importantly, 2 years ago, her only son died of a drug overdose, and she's been unstable ever since. I'm not sure if she thinks we're holding him hostage, or his ghost is here or what. But that's why. She's been to several psychiatric hospitals throughout her life, and now she's stopped taking her medication because she's throwing it over our fence. Things finally came to a head in January of 2020, when during one of her usual arguments with the construction workers, she pulled out a BB gun. She was already very aggressive, so the BB gun just made things 100 times worse. I don't know if she just threatened to shoot them or if she actually did, but the cops were called regardless. It took them a while to talk her down, with several police officers swarming the street with big guns. I'm thankful that my parents had been filing police reports, so when they came they knew about Kay's history of mental illness. I'm both grateful and a little surprised that they handled the situation so well, because not a lot of police departments properly train their officers to deal with mentally ill patients, especially ones experiencing psychosis. Anyway, after that incident, Kay was not seen for a long time. We heard she was in a psychiatric hospital for many months, after which she returned to our neighborhood. She's doing much better now. She no longer does any of the strange behaviors she used to, and almost every day, me and my parents see her walk her dog past our house. She's clearly sticking to her routine, and I'm happy for her.
I live in a small rural community in the eastern United States. It's a nice little town, and because of my work in the medical field, I've met some interesting folks. I'm also familiar with law enforcement and emergency personnel. Small town life is not as dull and uneventful as people think, especially since everybody knows somebody who knows somebody. I have a lot of stories to share, but since this one just happened, I'll start here. Because it's still very recent and the investigation is ongoing, I have to be vague with some details, but I needed to tell someone. I'm single and live alone. Due to a stalker, I've moved twice, but that's another story for another time. However, it is relevant for this story for multiple reasons. The first reason being that I have a dog for the sake of protection, as well as have motion sensors and outdoor security cameras. The second reason being the location of my home, which is literally down the street from the fire department. I can see it from my living room window right now, and a couple of blocks from the police station. However, next to the fire department is the road department, which is basically a parking lot where they park their road equipment and empty garage trucks at night and on weekends. Oddly, it doesn't have a security camera. Small town life, I suppose. My house sits on a hill with a good view of that side of the street. Due to the incline, the large trees in the front yard, and the half cornfield in the property next to me, most people in the street below wouldn't notice me in the backyard unless they were actively looking. However, I can see the street clearly. This incident happened Saturday evening. The county was holding its annual Independence Day spiel with a community barbecue, music, fireworks, etc. I didn't attend because it's just not my thing. Plus, I have a dog and the sound of fireworks could be traumatizing, as I'm sure many of you know. Before the big show, I took the dog out to relieve herself in the backyard. There was still at least an hour of daylight, but the entire neighborhood was pretty quiet because most everyone was at the fairgrounds or various other holiday events. So when an unfamiliar, large white pickup drove slowly down the street, I noticed. It must have turned around at the end of the street because I saw it again, moving in the opposite direction only about 20 seconds later. This time it turned into the parking lot of the road department. Now, people have been known to toss things into the empty garage trucks, usually at night to avoid getting caught, because they don't want to or they're unable to make the trip to the landfill themselves. Usually it's things like furniture or broken equipment, but I didn't see any of those things in the back of this truck. The driver was a somewhat stocky guy of average height. He took 3 large black trash bags from the bed of his truck and tossed them one by one into the hopper of the garbage truck. Then he left. Now, I swear I'm not one of those meddling rear window types who always thinks activity is suspicious and that their neighbors are up to no good, but something about this didn't sit right with me. Normally, when I see people tossing their garbage into the trucks and leaving, I don't bother reporting it because it's relatively harmless. But this time, I had a gut feeling. So I called the police. If anything, they could get the guy for illegally dumping trash from a barbecue or whatever. While I'm on the phone with dispatch, I put my dog inside to cut down on distractions while the officers investigate. A few minutes later, an officer arrived and I crossed the street to meet him, gave him a description of the events, and pointed out which of the trucks the man had tossed the bags. He found the bags, took photos. He put on gloves and told me to stay back. The bags were tied in a knot at the top, and it took him a minute to untie one because of the gloves and how tight the knot was. But eventually he got it open, looked inside for a few seconds, then twisted it closed and took a few steps back. Dear God, he hissed under his breath. What? It's a body. I felt sick. I could tell he felt sick too. I saw him grow pale. His hand was trembling when he held the radio. Even his voice was shaking as he gave the code to dispatch. The dispatcher sounded confused when she asked him to repeat it. Within 10 minutes, the county sheriff was on the scene. Even he looked sick at the contents of the bag. The coroner arrived about 10 minutes after that, and the first officer walked me back to the house along with another one who arrived at the same time as the coroner. Though I showed the first cop via the app on my phone when I described the events initially, I now showed them the video on a larger screen. The camera caught footage of the truck as it drove by both times, as well as pulling into the parking lot, though unfortunately not a clear view of the license plate or the man tossing the bags out of frame. We watched the footage over and over, pausing frames, the officers taking notes. Ultimately, they requested this footage as well as a copy of the files from the past week to see if the truck had been in the area before. I've also been saving footage until the road department installs their own camera this week. Because this is still fresh, I don't know many more details. I know the body was in pieces, as they said, but I don't know the age of the victim, the gender, cause of death, any of that. Information hasn't been released to the public yet. I don't know if the coroner has ever been able to identify the body yet. A police cruiser has been parked at the fire department next door for constant surveillance in case the guy comes back. The guy who dumped the body was likely a local. How else would he know that he could dump there? He probably thought it'd get buried in other people's illegal trash accumulated over the holiday weekend, and the sanitation crew wouldn't have bothered to investigate. When I think about how this guy lives in my community, it makes me physically ill. To think that he had clearly scouted the area for a dump site, that it may not have been the first time this had happened, that this could happen again. If I hadn't called it in, if I hadn't been in the backyard at the exact moment, or if I had ignored that gut feeling, the victim would have never been found, may never find potential justice. Their loved ones may never have closure. In fact, there's a possibility that it might just happen again to another poor soul, and I just hope that it's not me. This happened shortly before weed was legalized in Germany. In Berlin, regulations were already fairly relaxed, and as long as you didn't explicitly bother anyone, you usually wouldn't get arrested for smoking in public. I've been smoking daily for years. I know it's not great, but that's besides the point, so I can function pretty well while stoned. However, I almost never smoked in public, partly to avoid trouble, but mostly because I prefer the comfort of my own home. One late night around 3 a.m., I was chilling online with friends ready to call it a day. I wanted to unwind with a joint and one of my favorite shows, but I had no snacks left. Determined to end the night properly, I decided to head to a nearby Späti, a small convenience store similar to a 7-Eleven. At that hour, only the sketchiest ones were still open, often operating illegally. I grabbed my coat and keys but hesitated before leaving. Why not make this cold walk a little bit more enjoyable, I thought, rolling a small joint. I lit it as I stepped outside, braving the freezing breeze. The area I live in is pretty rough, mostly foreign residents, many from Arabic countries. Poor integration has led to high crime and violence, but I was in good spirits as I strolled through the flickering neon sign of the Späti. Just one more intersection to cross. A group of men stood at the corner. They looked Middle Eastern, a bit older than me, and watched as I walked by. It felt normal, nothing unusual, and I crossed the street already a little high without giving them much thought. Then I heard a voice behind me. "Routine ID check. Please show me your identification." My heart sank. Of course this had to happen the one time I smoke in public, I thought, turning to face the police. But they weren't police. It was the group from the intersection, now slowly approaching me. "Routine ID check. Please show me your ID. We're undercover cops," one of them said with a very smug grin. I froze. It was clear they weren't cops. None of them showed identification, and their demeanor gave them away. "You know smoking weed is illegal, don't you?" The man continued, his pupils enormous, and it was obvious that they had no authority whatsoever. And they began circling me. "Show us what's in your pockets," the leader demanded. So, it's a robbery, I thought. If I don't resist, maybe I'll only lose my phone and the few bills that I brought for snacks. Then, a wave of dread hit me. My weekly tips, about $300 in cash, were also in my pocket. I'd forgotten to deposit it earlier, and losing that money would wreck my budget for the month. What now? As I slowly reached into my pocket, the leader pressed me. "What's taking so long?" I pulled out an old pack of gum and some broken headphones, hoping to satisfy them. "Where's your wallet? I need your ID," he insisted. Now, still fumbling, too stubborn and stupid to hand over my tips, I inadvertently noticed something that shocked me. The glint of a Glock tucked in his belt. Knives and metal rods are typical weapons around here, but a gun? That was insane, even by local standards. German gun laws are incredibly strict, and my adrenaline spiked. Slowly, I pulled out the €5 bill that I'd planned to use for snacks, trying to keep my expression neutral. "You got no wallet?" he growled, his face darkening. My brain screamed at me to do something, anything before this escalated further. Then, a desperate thought flashed through my mind. The Arabs in this area were known to fear Russians due to frequent clashes between the two groups, and maybe, just maybe, I could use this to my advantage. In a very heavy Russian accent, I stammered, "My friends have my wallet. They're coming soon. We'll meet here." And to my surprise, their poor English comprehension worked in my favor. They exchanged glances, muttered in German, and decided to wait, and I forced myself to look confused, keeping up the bluff. It worked, though. Their effort to figure me out seemed too much trouble, and the leader finally pointed at the €5 bill. "All right, then. You get us something to drink." Reluctantly, I followed them into the Späti. They grabbed a 6-pack of Coke, and I paid. My heart was pounding, and I was sure that this wasn't over. That they'd search me or retaliate when my non-existent friends didn't show up. But then, just like that, they left. No violence, no further questions, nothing. I stood there in shock, unable to process what had just happened. Now looking back, I can't believe I bluffed my way out of such a dangerous situation. It could have been my last day on Earth, all for €300. I've learned my lesson, and these days I avoid walking around late at night when the streets are empty.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. There are pretty disturbing posts and stories you come across while going through 4chan that is too much to handle for those who are weak-hearted. But those of you who don't know about this, 4chan is an anonymous website where one can post anything without any filter. This was back in 2011, around the time when I first got to know about the website. I was still in high school and a pretty naive kid who used to follow what other most popular kids used to do. The reason was that I was always in a world of my own, watching movies like a high school nerd, suddenly getting popular and started hanging out with the cool kids, eventually ending up with the most gorgeous girl in the entire movie. What I didn't know at the time was that sometimes real life can be scarier than a movie. Looking at how kids in my school were always on their phones doing nothing, I started doing the same. It was the time when I started going through 4chan just to keep myself busy. But as time passed, I somehow started to become addicted to the website, since it always had something new and interesting. I never actually posted anything or talked with anyone. I was more of an observer or whatever entrancing things were going on the forum. As I was more and more absorbed in it, I started losing interest in the popular kids and focused more on what was keeping me constantly interested. One day when I was going through the website, I saw someone post a picture of a red painted chair with a star sign over it. I don't know why, but for some reason the necklace seemed strangely familiar, which was weird. The chain seemed freshly painted since it was still wet and was smudged all over the table it was put on. Upon looking at the picture, anyone could say that the person who had uploaded the picture is trying to boast his or her painting skills, which was pretty sloppy. It didn't seem like something to look at, so I shrugged it off. And since the class was about to start soon, I put my phone in my locker after turning it off. In the middle of the lecture, I noticed the 5th seat of the 2nd row was empty. Looked like Annie was absent. She was the most beautiful girl in the entire school, and obviously the girl I had a crush on, since she was going to become mine someday. I was pretty disappointed that she was absent, as sneaking glances during the lectures had become my favorite hobby. She was always accompanied by her best friend Elizabeth, who was the 2nd most beautiful girl, probably playing the role of the 2nd female lead in our story. The girl who always fell in love with the main lead, but due to my heart belonging to Annie, she would have to be disappointed in the end. The lecture ended when I was lost in my imagination, and since I wasn't able to pay attention to it, I was going to have to go to the library to give an extra hour to cover up the lesson. The remaining lectures went by just as normally as they always have been, and once I was done with the class, I went straight to the library. Looking at the number of students in our school, it was quite big. It didn't lack any facilities either. It had a cafeteria that served good food, multiple playgrounds, and music rooms. But what I loved the most were the two libraries. Most of the students used to go to the big library in the main building, while the second library, which was smaller in comparison, and being in the east building, was not so popular despite being peaceful. It was because the east building was a bit far, and only a few classes used to be held there in rare cases. Rumors among students said that there were ghosts in that building, but they were all false since I always used to go to that library and study till late. Since the library was on the third floor and the elevator not working as usual, I started walking up the stairs when I heard faint whispers coming from the last classroom in the left corridor. I was instantly reminded of the ghost rumors, but I shook it off because I knew very well that there was no such thing as ghosts. The door of the room was partially open, so peeked through and saw two of our students standing there. I could only see their backs, so I couldn't figure out who they were. As my eyes scanned the area, they landed on Annie's lifeless body. I couldn't stop the sudden scream from leaving my throat, causing the two students to turn immediately. For some reason, my legs gave up. I knew in my mind that I had to run and tell someone, but the cowardliness in my cells was at its peak. My body froze, my eyes stuck on Annie's slit throat. I was too petrified to be able to do anything. I somehow broke free of it, only to find that Elizabeth and Andrew weren't there anymore. They killed Annie. I had to do something. I had to tell the principal about it. And as I was turning about thinking this, I saw Andrew standing behind me with an unsettling smile forming across his lips. I was thrown around in one blow, causing my back to hit the wall and making a cracking sound along the way. He then took out his belt and started striking me, aiming mainly at my neck area. I started crawling away from him. He grabbed my left foot and started dragging me inside the classroom Annie was in. These bastards knew very well that no matter how much I screamed, it was almost impossible for my voice to reach someone. And even if they did hear a faint sound coming from there, they would probably assume it was a ghost. He broke my arms and my left ankle, causing me an immense amount of pain. Before I could let out a scream, he stood on my throat and started strangling me with his foot. As I was passing out from the lack of oxygen and pain, I could see a silver star chain necklace peeking out from his shirt. I remember now. It was Annie who used to wear it. No wonder it looked familiar. These were the last thoughts that came across my mind before everything went dark. When I woke up, it was already dark. I painfully managed to turn my face around only to find Annie's body missing. Guess they might have taken it. They must have thought I was dead, that's why they left me here. Hiding two dead bodies on the same day must have been too much for them, so they cleared the one that had the possibility of rotting. Everything was broken in my body, so getting up was extremely painful. I don't know how I managed to gather so much courage, but I still managed to do it, and dragging myself out of the school to the hospital that was a few blocks away from there. Watching me walk into the hospital building in such a condition, the nurse preset there rushes to my side and took me to the emergency room. When the doctor asked me who did it, I opened my mouth to tell him. I realized I was unable to speak, since that monster stood on my throat and strangled me with full force. Don't worry, it'll take some time, but it will heal. Take some rest till now. I watched his back as he walked away after saying that. A clump of tears formed in my throat with the helplessness I was feeling. With every single hit he had given me, it was like I was forcibly shaken away from my dream to my senses. Reality is truly scarier than a movie.
I got my first job when I was 15. Back then, we barely made anything per hour. Honestly think I started at like $5 or something like that. I was working in customer service, which seemed like it would be relatively easy, but I knew instantly that I hated it. The customers were always rude and miserable to deal with most of the time. I did like getting a paycheck though, and it allowed me to get a cell phone and just have some toss around cash when hanging out with my friends. This was in the early days of things like Craigslist and Facebook, just as MySpace was winding down. Trying to find a better way to make some cash, I started strolling Craigslist for opportunities where I didn't have to deal directly with customers. It was pretty slim pickings. I called for a few landscaping jobs but never heard back. I stumbled across an ad looking for someone who could help with a summer cleanup of a few properties that were purchased adjacent to my neighborhood. The ad was pretty vague, I guess, and didn't mention much of that work actually needing to be done. I sent a response, and the next morning I got a call asking if I could show up to work. I was ecstatic. I figured if this worked out, I could kiss customer service goodbye, at least for the summer. I arrived at a property that was a little overgrown and a little shady from all the trees. I walked to a door that I assumed was a front door and was eventually greeted by this guy who introduced himself as Chip, and he had a smile almost like the Grinch, crooked yellow teeth and absolutely rancid breath. It was honestly one of the worst things I'd ever smelled, and I can still see a smile in my mind to this day. Anyways, this guy, Chip, started giving me a tour of the grounds and outlined some of the work that needed to be done. Some outdoor maintenance, tree trimming, chopping wood, but wanted me to start with some interior cleaning. I remember him taking me down a narrow flight of stairs into a finished basement. It was one room and completely square. The ceiling, floor, and walls were all wood. It was extremely dim and only gave off a small amount of yellow light. He gave me Pledge or Pine Sol, I don't remember which one, but I remember I wasn't familiar with the product as it had a very strong smell, and I thought after attempting to clean the walls that I was either staining them or ruining them with how I was attempting to clean. I had chores all my life, so I wasn't a novice to cleaning, but it definitely wasn't the spray stuff my mom had for us at home to clean the woodwork. After about what I think was 2 hours of cleaning, I took a quick seat to wipe the sweat from my head and take a sip of water. As I sat on the floor, I looked up the stairway that was barely illuminated and thought that I saw a dog or something laying at the top of the stairs. I wiped off my glasses and squinted up the stairs to see if I could make out what it was, but I just couldn't. I slowly got up and walked closer and saw that it was that Chip guy lying on the floor with a seemingly blank expression. As I got closer, I called out, "Is that you?" The blank stare turned into this very grotesque smile with those yellow crooked teeth, and he then whispered something like, "Oops, you caught me," followed by a quiet little laugh. I decided to do some of the outdoor work to pass the time and everything was going fine, but I kept getting a weird feeling from recalling that very strange moment. Yes, it was extremely weird and I probably should have just gotten out of there then, but I was a teenage kid at the time and I was a big kid, so I really didn't have too many worries and I just wanted to make some money. While I was outside, this Chip guy would be out there having a cigarette, staring at me. Or if he wasn't outside, every so often I would look at one of the windows and the blinds would suddenly be moving. I started to pretend like I was looking the other way but had my eyes fixated on the window. I could see his head trying to poke through the curtains looking at me and what I was doing. The day was about half over, give or take, if I recall correctly, and he asked if I could clean another basement similar to the one I had done before. I really didn't want to because I was freaked out from the last time and because I felt like I was destroying this guy's damn wooden walls and floors with that pine saw. But I followed him to where I needed to go anyway, and as we got to the staircase, he stepped to the side and said something like, "There you go." But the basement was completely pitch black. I could barely see the stairs that I'd be walking down. I asked him, "Is there some light or something I can't see?" And he says, "Unfortunately not." And then went on to say that he had someone coming to install one, but there would be a light when I got down there. To this day, I still feel like he was breathing extremely heavily. I don't know if it was the hot breath hitting my neck and cheek, or if he was really breathing like Darth Vader. I took a few steps towards the stairs and felt his breathing stop, like he was getting excited or nervous. I quickly grabbed my phone like I was getting a call and took a few steps back and headed towards the door to go outside. I sort of did a mock phone call as Chip stared at me with his hands on his hips. I looked at him and said, "Hey, I'm really sorry. I got a family emergency and I gotta go." Given it was my first day, he was really understanding. He was passive-aggressive and kind of short, but he probably had the right to be. I knew right at that moment that there was no chance in hell that I was going back, though. I went back to my customer service job where, even though I had to deal with people's crap, it was pretty easy work. And about halfway through the summer, I was eating dinner in the living room after getting out of work while my parents were watching the news, and I heard a report about a stalking incident which also led to an attempted breaking and entering. I hated the news and thought nothing of it, but then I heard the anchor mention a name, and it was that guy Chip's name. I immediately threw my plate down, asked them to turn it up, and sure enough, there he was. It was his complete full name, and I could not believe it. My parents asked why I was all of a sudden interested in the news, and I just gave them some stupid answers so I didn't make them worried. But to this day, I wonder what would have happened if I continued working with this Chip guy. He was clearly some type of predator with pending charges of stalking and B&E. But anyways, now I work from home and don't have to deal with customers or any bosses that creep me out the way that guy did. I practice Taekwondo in a stadium in my city. It's a dangerous place, but I have been living all my life there and nothing has happened to me, so normally I forget about the robs and drugs and all of that. One day I was chatting with a friend in the entrance of the stadium and there was a guy shirtless and with a lot of muscles. He was just standing in front of a wall reading something, so none of us care about him. Some minutes later we say goodbye and leave to different places. I decide to walk to my house. I live about 30 to 40 minutes away. Because I had time and was a nice day, so while I was walking, I saw the same guy from before. He was walking in the street and fighting with the drivers. All I thought was that he was on some drugs and just kept walking. About 10 minutes later, he disappeared. Some minutes passed and nothing happened. I was just listening to music and walking. But 20 minutes later, or more or less, the guy passed me. I was kind of shocked because he appeared from nowhere, but he passed me, so I thought I was being way too paranoid. Then he stands in the same cross I was, and he watched me. I felt weird and texted my mom that I was close to home and asked her to open the door. It's important to describe my house for this. I live in a 3rd floor, but it's not a normal building. There are houses in the ground level, with 2nd floor backyard and everything. In between 2 houses there is a stair that lets you in the 3rd floor. There are more houses over the ones on the ground level, and I live on the 3rd. So when I get to the stairs, the door was open and my dog was waiting for me. So I sit on the floor and pet her. Then my mom was like, "Be careful, there's someone behind you. Move so he can pass." I reply with an okay, stand up, and went to the stairs without looking back. We started walking to my door. I went inside my house and looked back, and there he was. The shirtless guy was behind me all along, and he just was standing outside of my house. My mom closed the door and freaked out. She asked me if I knew him, if he had talked to me or something. I looked at her confused, still shocked. She started calling my dad. loud enough so the guy outside could hear it. My dad didn't hear her, but that was enough. The guy finally left. This happened some months ago, but it still freaks me out. He saw me, and he followed me, and now he knows where I live.
When I was about 11, I had this friend of a friend called Alex. He was 6 or 7 years older than us, but was a major nerd and had no friends that were his age. He would just constantly show up and would try to play with us. But honestly, I think my friend was just inviting him behind our backs and playing dumb to the rest of us. Needless to say though, I didn't really like him, and we would constantly argue and talk badly to each other, and never got physical besides the tackle that was a little too hard or just pushing each other around a bit. But after a while, for some reason, we both kinds of clicked with each other at one point and just stopped arguing. Well, we weren't going for each other's throats anymore anyway. But for the first time after a long time, I went to Alex's house and his mom greeted us. She seemed very nice, but very passive and almost submissive. We sat down and talked to her for a bit. Then, we listened to some music and played on the Xbox. Then my dad telephoned me, so I left Alex's room to go to the kitchen, sit down, and take the call. Then suddenly, I heard the door open and saw the 662, 150-pound, not buff, but definitely not fat, bald man standing in the doorway. We made eye contact, and he looked at me with pure disgust that I was sitting at his kitchen table. Then he said, "Who the hell are you?" He had this look in his eyes that was almost predator-like, and I was his prey. I froze and didn't say a word. "Are you going to make me repeat myself, boy?" he growled. Alex had now come from his room and explained to his dad who I was. "Okay, well, get them the hell out of my house. You know better than to have friends here on weekdays while me and your mom go to work." I left in a hurry, and I'm not lying when I say that. I've never felt like that ever again. I can't really explain it. It wasn't really fair, but more of you're in danger vibe. Needless to say, I never went inside his house again. Fast forward a few months later, and Alex and I didn't really talk as much as we did. Alex had apparently gotten rejected by one of our mutual female friends, and he had then decided to break a 6-foot dollhouse over the girl's head. She had to go to the hospital and get 9 staples because of it, and there was a possibility she would lose her eye. Understandably, I heard that an adult male had hit my 15-year-old friend, so at that point, I just snapped and wanted to fight this guy because of it. But he was 18, and I was still loving. I called him 40 times and left a voicemail after voicemail, telling him I was going to kill him. I got arrested for this, even at age 11. I know it wasn't the smartest idea. And I told him to come to fight me, and screamed at him, telling him to hit me like he'd hit her. I'd actually walked to his house and were standing on the sidewalk, still calling out to him. He finally picked up though. I just carried on screaming at him to come out and fight me. He was silent the whole time, but I could tell the phone was on speaker. Alex hung up the phone and I thought he was going to come out to fight me, but he never did. His dad came out instead and said the police were on their way, and if you step on this grass, I'll kill you. Stop calling my son, and we will have problems. I never told the cops that his dad had threatened me because honestly, I was freaking out about it. But now I had to explain to my family that I was getting arrested for threatening an 18-year-old while I was 11. I ended up with a few charges and was told that if I made any more contact, I'd end up in juvie. Again, this was because of a child threatening an adult. I was eventually forced into court, though, because my family wanted to drag me through the process as punishment. I think they only did this in an attempt to set me straight, like that TV show. But here's where the story takes a wild twist. 2 weeks before our court date, Alex's father was charged with a cold case of rape and murder. Alex's dad and his best friend had taken the friend's girlfriend out to a bar, drugged her repeatedly, then raped her. Then they beat her to death, to the point where she'd had multiple skull fractures, and even a part of her skull had been caved in. Then they took her to a bike trail and left her there to be found in the morning. And they did all this with no real concern of getting caught. This shocked the hell out of me. But what really scared me was his dad, and the times he'd said, "I'll kill you if you touch the grass, or we will have problems," etc. Normally I would have thought it was all just BS, but from him, I think it was never a threat. It was a promise. And it scares me to even think about the voicemails I'd left. And I honestly feel blessed that he hadn't come after my family, since he'd already shown to have little remorse or care for another human's life. When we got to court, Alex was staring at the man who just put his dad away for life. And there was little discussion about my charges. And Alex had never saved the voicemails anyway, so all charges of me were dropped. The next morning, Alex and his mom packed up and moved. I haven't seen them again since. Alex never got charged for assaulting the girl, because there was never a police report made. The girl had begged her parents to tell the doctors it was an accident, so the police had no idea about what had happened, until I told them why I threatened Alex in the first place.
Back in 2013, I lived in Providence, Rhode Island, and had moved there for a new job. It was just me living there in a quaint and spacious townhouse with my then 4-year-old daughter. We were relatively new to the area and didn't know many people, but did become familiar with a kind older gentleman who lived next door. His name, for the purpose of this story, was Ben. He lived in a connected townhouse with our 2 units abutting each other, and our street was lined with beautiful floral trees and quite nice, but Providence is weird in that the conditions of the house and little neighborhoods can vary drastically street by street. We were near a few rough neighborhoods, but I felt relatively safe in my new home. I remember a few nights prior to this specific night, I saw a Facebook post with a safety tip to put your car keys next to your bed so if anything ever happens, you can press the alarm and scare an intruder off. I've never been overly concerned about my safety and rarely took advantage of any tips I saw on Facebook, so I'm not sure how or why I suddenly decided to heed this advice. I was reading a book in bed with my light on in my second-floor bedroom, hours after putting my daughter to sleep, when I heard a loud sound outside. I peered out the window to take a look and saw nothing. I had taken some melatonin that evening, turning off the light, and went to sleep. It was maybe a half hour later or so when I was suddenly woken up by what felt like almost an earthquake. The room shook and I heard a loud thud. Half awake, I gasped and sat up wondering if it was my imagination or if I actually felt something, and immediately ran to my daughter's room thinking that she had fallen off her bed or injured herself or something. As I swung her door wide open, there she was, sleeping soundly and sweetly, and I was confused. I heard another loud bang and had this sort of eerie feeling that something was wrong, but I couldn't figure out what. I grabbed my car key fob and took it downstairs as I nervously inspected the first floor. I swore to myself that if I heard one more sound, I would press that alarm just in case, but I didn't. It was silent after that. I returned to bed and took a while to fall asleep again, but soon shut my eyes. The next day went on like any other day when I noticed a friend of mine had repeatedly called me in the afternoon, and I picked up my daughter from preschool and called the friend back. "Did you hear?" he said. "No, what?" "News outlets were mobbing your street about an hour ago, and the news trucks were even in your driveway." And I sat silent, confused. 3 men broke into your neighbor's place last night, tied him up at gunpoint, and stole thousands of dollars worth of items, and took off with his car. I immediately fell to my knees and began sobbing. I had heard it all happen, and I almost pressed the button. I almost, but I didn't. I sobbed and felt completely unsafe. I asked a friend to come over for the night to stay with us, and it wasn't until the next day that I got the chance to speak to Ben. Ben explained the whole story and told me the cops wanted to talk to me so I could share what I had heard and experienced. He said the men smashed the window in his basement and entered through there, the sounds that I heard before going to bed. Apparently the timeline suggested that they saw my light and me peering out of the window and waited 30 minutes or so until my light was out to enter the premises. They didn't realize that he was home, and since he had gone to bed early that night, it was suggested that they cased his place beforehand. He had been asleep when one of them started rummaging through his things upstairs in his bedroom, which was directly on the other side of my closets, separated by a shared wall. The sounds and vibrations I heard were apparently the intruder knocking him down after realizing Ben was there. The intruder cupped Ben's mouth, threatening to kill him if he made another sound. And this explains why I heard nothing further while I was investigating afterwards. After they tied him up, he remained restrained for over 12 hours and eventually broke free before calling the police. I broke down and apologized to Ben profusely, explaining what I had heard. He simply replied that while he was tied up, all he could think about was how glad he was that it didn't happen to me and my little girl. I honestly don't know how I would have coped if my daughter and I had experienced that level of trauma firsthand. Ben seemed to be okay, considering everything, but it took me a long time to feel safe again and to let go of the guilt. They never caught the men, and I ended up ordering a taser, which is illegal, and some mace. And for the first time, I even considered getting a gun, but I decided against it. Thankfully, I haven't experienced anything close to that since, and sincerely hope I never do. I'm glad Ben was ultimately okay, but next time, I'll listen to my instincts.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
There was Luca, Joshua, Martin, and I. The sleepover plan wasn't mine to begin with. It was when I was having a pleasant conversation with them and slipped up about my parents going out for a few days. It was like Joshua found a diamond or something. He got so excited that he even ended up inviting our friends to a sleepover at my house without even asking me. So here's the deal. Joshua's my childhood friend, and he used to spend most of my time in my house. Anyways, the boys were invited, so I had to prepare for the sleepover. By preparing, I mean telling them to bring their snacks, drinks, and blankets. Everyone arrived one by one at the house, and the sleepover began. We were laughing, drinking, and making jokes at each other when we heard a creaking sound coming from the front yard of my house. We thought it must be a cat or a raccoon, so we continued having fun, and that was when Martin turned on the TV to watch the football game. After a short while, we heard the creaking sound getting louder and weirder, so we decided to check it. Joshua felt a bit braver than others and volunteered to check on his own. Yeah, he's the kind of guy who always gets in trouble, but he went to check while the rest of us continued doing what we were doing. When we came back, he was all freaked out. He could not speak for a few minutes and only kept saying, "From the news." So Luke and I decided to go and take a look at what freaked him out so much. When we looked in the direction of the creaking sound, it was too dark and we couldn't see anything. So we turned our flashlights on and saw a man leaning on the fence with his head down, pushing it, which was making the creaking sound. We immediately ran inside and locked the door. Joshua looked at us and with fear in his eyes and said, "It's the guy from the news." I took the remote from Martin's hand and started switching between news channels, and there was no news of that man. And that was when Joshua took out his phone, searched for something online, and then turned his phone towards us. I recognized the man in an instant. It was him. There was an article which said that the serial killer who had killed more than 15 people were mostly teenagers is on the loose, and police are looking for him at the moment. The creaking sound had stopped by now, and we decided to call the cops and tell them about the man is here. We immediately called 911 and informed them about the man. They were here in a few minutes and looked around the house, but there was no one. They told us that we could call them if something happens, and then left. We were 14-year-old boys, and that is why all I could think about was that we were the perfect target for him. That was when I remembered that I forgot to lock the back door. The cops did not look inside the house, so there were still some chances that he had already gone in and could be hiding somewhere. I thought of telling Joshua about it, but thinking about how easily he starts panicking, I let go of the thought. Luca was the more mature and fearless among Luca and Martin, so I walked him slowly and whispered in his ears about the possibility of the guy being here. He told me to sit down, acting as if nothing had happened, and he would ask others to leave by making up some kind of excuse. I went down to sit while sneakily looking around to make sure that he isn't there, but that was when I noticed a shadow down the hall, and I guess Joshua noticed it too. As he was about to scream, Luca put his hand on his mouth, signaling Martin and him to keep his mouth shut. I grabbed the vase that was sitting on the table while others grabbed whatever they could at the moment too, which the man had already taken notice of, that we were aware of his presence in the house. And as he was about to come out, we made a run towards the entry gate of the house. Luca dialed 911 and then told him about the man being inside our house. They asked us to keep calm, and within a few minutes a police car arrived. 3 officers came out and started searching the house. As they found the man, he attacked one of them with a kitchen knife and ran towards the back door. One of the officers called for backup and started chasing him, while the other one took the injured one to the car to first aid him. They asked us to call my parents and inform them about the situation, which I did. After hearing that my parents were extremely worried about us, they told us to stay over at Joshua's house, which was only a few blocks away. The backup cops arrived at the location and they started searching for the man near the house and in the area. We walked to Joshua's house while being extra aware of the surroundings because he could be anywhere. But thank God that we did not encounter him on the way. Joshua's parents were already aware of the situation by my parents, so they let us in immediately and locked every entry or exit door of the house. The next morning, I was hesitating to leave from my house. But then I heard on the news when Joshua's dad turned on the television that the serial killer was arrested last night after a handful of struggles. 2 officers were seriously injured by his attack, but now he's locked in prison for further proceedings. We all took a sigh of relief and headed for our homes. When I reached my house, the first thing I did was lock the back door, and then went ahead to my bedroom to get some sleep since none of us got any last night.
I'm going to take you back a few years to when I was working at McDonald's. For context at the time, I was a 16-year-old female. Now at the McDonald's I worked at, when you are on headset, you answer people at the drive-thru. You are normally required to be at the first window to also take payment. My job position was customer care manager at the time, so my job was to be on the front desk, but 99% of the time, they required me to be behind tills. So I was having a normal day, working a long shift but having a normal work day. I happened to be on headset, and first window that day too. My headset buzzes, letting me know there's someone at my drive-through lane. I go through to the first window to answer my customer, and this is how the conversation ensued. "Hello, welcome to McDonald's, what can I get you?" "Oh wow, you got a beautiful voice." His voice was grunty and husky sounding, not off-putting. We have all sorts of customers come through McDonald's every day, so it didn't give me the creeps or anything. "Thank you, sir, how very flattering. What can I get you?" "I haven't decided yet." There's a long pause here. "Can I come to the first window to decide? I want to see who I'm talking to." Now, we weren't very busy at this point. The creeper hadn't actually creeped me out. I mean, all he'd done was pay me a compliment, and we quite often had people complaining that they preferred face-to-face contact, so this certainly wasn't out of the blue or unusual. "Yeah, sure sir, that's fine." "Wow, you're as beautiful as you sound." "Thank you sir. Have you decided what you're going to order?" "Are you an option?" I laughed nervously at this. It was my first job, and I wasn't the rude kind of person where someone was paying me a compliment. I must also point out this guy must have been in at least his 60s. I remember he had one lazy eye that looked to the left, painfully awful teeth, and patchy dark brown hair. At this point, I was a little bit uncomfortable, but was still more than willing to take his order. "I'll have a cheeseburger." "Okay sir, that'll be 99p. Are you paying cash or card?" Without answering my question, he started asking me where I'm from, how old I was, etc. But it wasn't until his last question that I got super weirded out. "What time do you finish work?" 7:30, why? I didn't actually finish at 7:30, but 7:30 was the first number that came into my head when I blurted it out. I finished at 8 and would probably do some overtime too, but I wasn't about to let him know that. "I can meet you if you want. I can pick you up outside and we can go somewhere." All the while he's saying this, he has this horrendous grin on his face and keeps winking at me. "I'm really sorry, sir. I'm not allowed to meet customers outside of work. It's against employee policy." This was utter bull, but I needed him to leave me alone, and he carries on being insistent but not getting the picture, and I cut the conversation short. "Anyway, sir, sorry to be rude, but can I have the 99p for your cheeseburger?" "Ah, yes, sorry. See you at 7:30. Off he drove to the next window, and I was gobsmacked. I'd already said I wasn't going to see him. I was a little bit shocked, but was not going over there to give him the satisfaction of talking to me again. My coworker came to me and said, "Ew, that guy had a major crush on you. I wanted your number, but I didn't give it to him. He's old enough to be your dad, if not older." Anyway, I explained exactly what happened and how uncomfortable it made me. 7:30 came around and my coworker spooked. The creeper was actually waiting in the car park for me, just like he said he would. He sat halfway down the car park, and you could see him just staring in. Our car park wasn't very big. It only had 4 rows of parking spaces, so he wasn't that far away, and would have clocked me the minute I walked out the door. At this point, I'm freaking out, and head to the back of the store where hopefully he can't see me. I had to stay in the back of the store for 40 minutes before we knew it was safe to come out. Fast forward a week and Creeper is back on drive-thru, and guess who's back on headset at window 1? Me. I heard his voice and recognized it straight away. "I was hoping I'd hear your voice again. Why didn't you meet me the other day?" 1 second, sir. I'll be with you in 1 second. I immediately handed my headset to my manager and gave him a quick briefing of the situation. He gladly took the headset and dealt with the customer from start to finish. When my manager came back to me to let me know he'd gone, he said the creeper had been asking my name, my address, and my surname. My manager said he was the most creepiest guy he'd ever met, and I was never to have anything to do with him again. If he came back to work while I was there afterwards, my manager would have to head me to the back room while he dealt with him. He still asked about me every time. So to the creepy McDonald's guy, let's never meet again.
One night in May of 2010, the Suffolk County Dispatch Center in Long Island, New York, received a call from a terrified young woman. When asked what the nature of her emergency was, the caller replied that someone was trying to kill her. In a display of brutal honesty, the young woman admitted that she was a working girl and that a call to a client had gone horribly wrong. She added that she had successfully fled his apartment, but that she was terrified that he might be following her. When asked her location, the caller replied she was in the area of Ocean Parkway and Oak Beach, a small community located on the eastern side of Jones Beach Island. Since Oak Beach is built around a small stretch of 15-mile-long Ocean Parkway, the dispatcher told the young woman to make her way to a well-lit, open space near the highway. The plan was to position the girl in such a bright and public place that it might deter her attacker from making a move, but it also allowed nearby police units to race down the highway until the caller could see and hear their blaring lights and sirens. Again, such police activity would surely deter any potential attackers. Towards the end of their conversation, the caller is said to have said to the dispatcher, "Okay, I can see the cops now, thank you so much." The dispatcher then relayed the information to the patrol car, telling them the girl would be just a few hundred yards ahead of them. The caller once again thanked the dispatcher, then hung up the phone, apparently just seconds away from flagging down the incoming officers. But those officers say they didn't see any female in their early 20s standing by the side of the parkway. In fact, they didn't see anyone at all. They continued to prowl up and down the highway for a while just to make sure they hadn't missed anything, but there was nothing. The cops in question hoped for the best. After all, there was a chance she'd been picked up by a friend or a coworker. Maybe she'd even caught a cab or found some other method of escape. But regardless, the girl's name and description were passed along to Homicide and Missing Persons as a potential Jane Doe. 7 months later, their worst fears came true. On the morning of December 11, 2010, Officer John Malia and his trained cadaver dog Blue were hard at work. They had been tasked with searching the surrounding area for any signs of the missing girl, and for the past half a year, they had been systematically searching and eliminating grid square after grid square in a comprehensive search for her remains. Over the course of the summer, he had unsuccessfully searched several gated beach communities in the area for any sign of the missing girl, but each time, despite scouring 1 or 2 areas that he thought were of particular interest, he had no luck. This wasn't for any lack of trying or skill either. Blue, his trusted German Shepherd, was a veritable expert in finding decomposing bodies. Even if they had been buried up to a depth of around 6 or 7 feet, Blue would paw at the ground and bark, and he wasn't often mistaken. This is why, on that chilly December morning, when Blue began to alert towards the beach near Ocean Parkway, John trusted Blue to bring him results. Lo and behold, the decaying corpse of a 24-year-old female were found in an unmarked, shallow grave in the sandy earth. But that wasn't the only set of remains that Blue alerted to that day. Even with the thick vegetation and light layer of snow, the area on the opposite side of the highway proved to be nothing less than a graveyard, with Blue alerting every couple of feet. Not only were Shannon Gilbert's remains found, but the body of the missing Melissa Barthélemy was found, reduced to nothing more than a skeleton interred in a burlap sack. Police managed to recover 3 other bodies in the grassy area, that of Maureen Brainerd, Megan Waterman, Amber Costello, and the missing Shannon Gilbert, who Officer Malia had originally been looking for. All were within just 500 feet from one another. The following March, during the recovery of the other 5 bodies, The remains of one Jessica Taylor were found in a shallow grave at the side of Ocean Parkway. This was extremely worrying for investigators because what they only described as partial remains belonging to Jessica had been found 8 years earlier over in nearby Manorville. It was looking more and more likely that the cops had a serial killer on their hands, as 3 additional sets of remains were unearthed over the following month, including those of an unidentified female toddler, an unidentified Asian trans woman, and Valerie Mack, whose partial remains had been previously found in Manorville in November of 2000. Despite mounting evidence of a serial killer being at work, it took until November of 2011 for law enforcement to announce that they believed one person to be responsible for all 10 murders, that the person is most likely a native of Long Island, and that there'd be a $25,000 reward for any information leading to their arrest. As of December 2015, the Suffolk County Police had been assisted in the investigation by a number of FBI agents. The FBI stepping in was preceded by the disturbing revelation that former Police Commissioner James Burke had been blocking FBI involvement in the so-called Long Island serial killer murders and had been doing so for years. Burke resigned shortly after the scandal broke, and his reasoning behind blocking the FBI is yet to be determined. But the fact that a man so high up in the police hierarchy could deny such cases of vital material and human resources is deeply confounding. Whether or not he was trying to cover up the murders, or it was foolish pride that had him eschewing any federal assistance, it's anyone's guess. But Burke was sentenced to 46 months in prison in November of 2016 on charges of assault and conspiracy. Local police and FBI agents worked steadily on the case for almost 2 years before a Suffolk County prosecutor announced that John Bittroff, a carpenter from Manorville, was suspect in at least one of the murders. Bittroff had been convicted in May of that year of the murders of 2 female escorts in 1993 and 1994, and in June 2019, homicide detectives proposed steps to use genetic genealogy to identify the unidentified victims and possibly the Long Island serial killer himself. It's unknown that any such tests have taken place, but if they have, they certainly didn't implicate Bittroff any further, as no further attempts to charge him seem to have been made. Those affected by the murders had to wait years for any additional information, but in January of 2020, Suffolk County Police released images of a belt found at the crime scene, one embossed with either the letters HM or WH, depending on the orientation of the belt, embossed in black leather. Police believe that the belt may well belong to the Long Island serial killer himself, but would not comment on exactly where the belt was found. However, they did mention the news scientific evidence was being used in the investigation, and they had launched GilgoNews.com, a website enabling Suffolk County Sheriff's Office to share news and receive tips regarding the investigation. Even though John Bittroff had a history of murdering working girls, the complete dearth of physical evidence means we're forced to consider other suspects in the murder of some, if not all, of the victims. Homicide detectives briefly considered Joseph Brewer, an Oak Beach resident, to be a suspect, given that he was one of the last people known to have seen Shannon Gilbert alive. It was he that apparently hired her as an escort from Craigslist on the night of her disappearance, and told police that shortly after Shannon arrived at his residence, she began acting erratically, and he made no contact with her after she fled his home. Shannon was reportedly seen running through Oak Beach, pounding on the doors of homes in Brewer's neighborhood. Around this time, Shannon called 911 saying that they were trying to kill her. Police, however, did not find any evidence of wrongdoing, and Brewer was quickly cleared as a suspect. It does raise the question, though, if she was looking for refuge, would she not have simply stayed at Joseph's place? Why expose herself at such an apparently perilous moment? It also came to light that just 2 days after Shannon was declared missing, an Oak Beach resident named Peter Hackett had telephoned Shannon's mother to inform her that he was taking care of her. When she asked what he meant by that, he told her that he ran a home for wayward girls. When pressed, he hung up. He flatly denied this phone call ever took place when the police paid him a visit, but investigators proved, though, that Hackett had indeed called Shannon's mother using his cell phone records. It seemed all too much of a coincidence that Shannon's body was found just a stone's throw away from Hackett's home residence, too, and her family have stated on multiple occasions that they believe he had something to do with their daughter's death. However, police later learned that Hackett had a history of inserting himself into or exaggerating his role in certain major events, and that he had done exactly the same thing with a number of other high-profile murders and disappearances around the wider New York area. Hackett later left town and seems to have been completely rolled out as a suspect by investigating police. This leads us back to former Suffolk County Police Chief James Burke, who, if you remember, resigned his position and eventually went to prison for a series of corruption scandals. In December 2016, Shannon's family discovered that an escort had approached the police to state that she suspected that Burke might be connected to the Long Island serial killer case, confirming something they had long suspected. The escort stated that she had attended a party in Oak Beach in April of 2011, and it was at this party that she saw none other than James Burke in attendance. Not only did Burke proposition her at said party, but she also witnessed him engaging in some disturbingly violent behavior. According to her, Burke was seen dragging a woman of Asian descent along a carpeted floor by the hair. This appalling display was stopped by other partygoers, but the other girls present came to learn that Burke's violent behavior was caused by him being unable to climax during his time with the girl. The girl in question wasn't even a working girl, and the argument had only stemmed because he'd, according to her, tried to throw a few $100s at me following the encounter. I told him I wasn't a working girl, and that's when he got violent. It was evident that by this point, not only did Burke make a habit of soliciting and visiting escorts, he was also prone to violence whenever things didn't go his way. As of the time of writing, the identity of the Long Island serial killer remains a mystery, and for all we know, he is still very much at large. The disturbing aspects of former Police Chief James Burke's behavior might well just be a coincidence, and the Long Island serial killer might well turn out to be someone entirely different. But given his attempts to block FBI involvement, the murderer of 10 to 16 young women might well be one of his own blood relatives, perhaps an old friend of his who might at one point have been involved in law enforcement. It's certainly disturbing to discover an active serial killer, especially one with apparent ties to police corruption. And even though the killings seem to have subsided in the wake of intensive investigation, the Long Island serial killer may just be waiting and watching, biding his time, before he can strike again. My boyfriend and I live in a big party city, so we're pretty used to strange neighbors and odd people. But 1 month ago, we had a really unsettling encounter. We just got the full context today. We live in a subunit of a larger house, and our landlord and one other person live in the other units of the house, and we noticed that our landlord had brought a few different dates over to the house. We didn't mind, and we weren't surprised when a girl was walking around the property. Last month, we went to sleep at about midnight and woke up 30 minutes later to knocks at the door. I told my boyfriend not to open it, but he said it was the girl that we saw earlier. I still felt very uneasy about the situation, so I put my clothes on and grabbed my keys and picked up our dog in case I had to run out the back door. I then go stand in the hallway next to the front door so I can hear the conversation, but she can't see me. She sounds very drunk and she tells my boyfriend that she's my landlord's fiancée. I am somewhat confused by this because of our landlord's other dates. However, she starts talking about how we're good tenants and mentions personal details about us, so we assume that she actually is his fiancée. She asked my boyfriend for a lighter for a cigarette, and we expect this to be the end of the interaction, But she then tells my boyfriend that our landlord is at a hotel cheating on her right now. My boyfriend responds with, "Oh, wow." And then she started flirting with my boyfriend. She invited him to come swim in our landlord's pool with her, and he declined. Now I'm starting to get less scared and more annoyed with this chick. She's rambling about a bunch of different topics and basically holding my boyfriend hostage. And finally, she gets to our neighbors. She starts going on some racist rant about them, using slurs that I have literally never heard in real life because they're that bad. And at this point, I'm pretty sick of this woman, so I step into the door frame and tell her that we have to wake up early. She was clearly shocked by me showing up, and this is when her face changes. She glares at me, and suddenly we aren't good tenants anymore, and she calls us white trash for not taking our garbage bins out in time for trash day. She screams that she's going to get us evicted if we don't get on her good side, and at this point we just close the door in her face. We had a really long discussion about whether or not we should complain to our landlord about her, and we assumed that he actually was dating this girl and that she just happened to be crazy. She probably caught him cheating and was trying to sleep with my boyfriend for revenge or something, but realized that wasn't going to happen. Eventually, we decided to text him. He apologized for the situation but was very vague. He doesn't mention that she is not his fiancée and that he'll remove her, and we assume that this is the end of it. For the last month, she's been blasting music, banging on the walls, taking things out of the shed, and coming into our section of the backyard in the middle of the night. I was absolutely terrified the first week and couldn't sleep at all. I would stay up all night listening to sounds and staring at our back window to see if she was in our yard, and eventually I just kind of got used to it. Our landlord had basically vanished. We hadn't seen him for the entire month until today. And today my boyfriend is walking our dog when he sees our landlord back on his porch, and our landlord finally tells us the full story. He went on a few dates with this woman and she seemed totally normal. Eventually, they go back to his section of the house, and when he wakes up, she's behaving much differently. He asks her to head out while he's at work, and he comes back and she's still there. And it turns out that this is what she does. She goes home with men and invades their home until they get her lawfully evicted. My landlord went to a different property for a month while he worked on a case to get her evicted. And we found out that she got served an eviction warning the same day that she came to our house, and that's why she was flirting with my boyfriend in an attempt to squat in our home. And that's why she was so angry when she found out that I lived there too. My landlord actually negotiated a way to get her out of the house a few days early. He bought her a one-way flight to another state, so if you live in the Midwest, watch out. She's coming north, and I'm very thankful that it's over here.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. Donna? As I saw her figure amidst the crowd, I rushed there. Jack, where are you going? I was in the middle of talking. Jack! I heard my date calling me from behind, but I ignored her since finding Donna was more important to me than dating. I looked around for several hours as the crowd started to fade, and there was no sign of her. Did I imagine it? Was I mistaken by someone else? As these questions crossed my mind, I was reminded of the girl I asked out over Hinge, whom I ditched to chase over a shadow. I called on her number and wasn't even a slight bit surprised that she blocked me. Who wouldn't? If I was in a normal condition, even I would block the person who ran off in the middle of a date. Dating was never my idea in the first place. My best friend Joseph was the one who installed Hinge on my phone and set this date up for me. I did chat with the girl a few times and she seemed nice and all, but my mind was distracted during the entire date. After sending an apologetic text, I threw my phone to the side of the bed, and then myself. As I stared at the ceiling, I couldn't help but remember the times I spent with her, and how much I regret not being able to stop her from leaving. Donna is my little sister, and among 5 siblings, she was the youngest and only sister, so she was loved by all. Of course, I was the one who was the second youngest and 2 years older than her, so my bond with her was the strongest. The two of us went to the same school. If anyone ever bullied her, she would run to me in the middle of class, and I would always stand up for her. That didn't mean that I left teasing and irritating her to the side. No, the more we hung out, the more we got on each other's nerves. Being the only girl in the family except for Mom, Donna had the privileges, and no one dared to raise their voice on her, except for me. The two of us fought like cat and mouse, and despite all the factors, she would still want to follow me around and play with me. I didn't mind it either, since I loved her just as much as everyone else. We all know how the families in USA work. Once the brothers start to turn 18, they move out one by one, leaving only the two of us with Mom and Dad. By the time Ethan, who was only 2 years older than me, moved, our oldest brother had proposed to her girlfriend for marriage. Even then, I didn't realize that my baby sister was starting to get quieter, and her behavior started to change. After Andrew's marriage, Logan also decided to start his family and moved with his fiancée. Then one day, Donna came to my room in the middle of the night to talk and asked if I would also move out of the house after turning 18. There was nothing I could say at the time since it was what I was, and my 18th birthday was 11 months away. To be honest, I didn't want to leave her all alone yet. I wasn't ready. But I knew very well that our parents wouldn't agree to me staying till her 18th birthday, so I didn't have a say in this. Besides, I'd already started to look for a place and was saving up money by working part-time. Judging my silence as a yes, she quietly got up and rushed out of my room. That was the first time I noticed my sister's changed behavior. Otherwise, she was always the stubborn type, and would often keep repeating her question until I gave her the answer she wanted to hear. Ever since that day, the talking between the two of us went to a bare minimum. The only time she would speak to me was when there was something necessary. I thought maybe she needed some time, looking at how all the drastic changes in her life were taking place, so I didn't think much of it and let her be. But her solitude went on way too long, and she ended up cutting me off completely, which started to concern me. We had fought before, and there were times when we went off to not talking to each other, but it never lasted more than 2 days, and at the end of the day, we would always end up talking among one another. A month before my birthday, she came to my room once again and asked if I had time to talk. "Sure, why don't you sit down first?" I said, clearing up my clothes off the bed. "I've asked Mom and Dad that I would be moving in with my boyfriend, and they have given me permission. So I was thinking I should tell you as well." I was confused at what I just heard. She wasn't even 16 yet. "What are you talking about, Donna? Why would Mom and Dad allow that?" As I asked her, she just shrugged her shoulders and looked me in the eyes. "You're not kidding, are you?" My voice was still filled with doubts, thinking she was pulling some sort of prank to stop me from moving out. "Why would I do that? You can ask our parents if you don't believe me." As she said that, my anger rose, and I ended up raising my voice. "Are you out of your mind? You want to live with a boy, and do you have any idea how dangerous it is?" Her expression changed, looking at me shout at her. It wasn't irritation, sadness, or anything, and it was something I couldn't tell at the moment. I rushed to Mom and Dad's room to ask if it was true that they had given her permission, and leaving me dumbfounded that they said yes, along with the lines that they had met the guy and he seemed rich and nice. Did they even love any of us? After arguing with them for almost an hour, I stormed outside the house without even looking at Donna. I didn't want to go back, so I stayed over at Joseph's place for the night. The next day when I got home, I noticed my sister wasn't there. For some reason, my heart started beating loudly, and the feeling of agitation started to take over my senses. I called Mom to ask if they were together, but she stated that she left her home this morning. Her voice sounded carefree as if she said she might be hanging out with her boyfriend, so I rejected the call. But for some reason, this situation seemed alarming to me. I rushed to her room only to find that her things weren't there anymore. Her clothes, shoes, makeup, and even books. Everything was gone. Was she planning on running away from the start? I tried calling her number, but she didn't pick up, and after several times, she turned her phone off. Having no idea who her boyfriend was, my perturbation only grew stronger by the minute. I again gave a call to Mom and asked about her boyfriend, but looking at how she didn't even remember his name, I was more than disturbed. Even Father had no idea about who he was and where he lived. I couldn't understand why in the world they permitted her to move in if they didn't even have basic information on the boy. Were they so eager for us to move out? I asked every possible person I knew she had contact with, and none of them had a single clue about her whereabouts or her boyfriend. After searching for her for days, I went to the police to report her missing, and as I was done with that, I went back to the house. And since my parents were so eager to see us move out, I did too. The news of her running away was shared with the other brothers as well, and everyone's trying just as hard as I am to look for her. But as all of them have a family to take care of, their time gets shared with them. That was the entire reason I was not ready to date. But Joseph keeps forcing me to move my life along with the search and keeps setting me up on dates on Hinge. The only reason I have this app is to see if my sister's profile pops up someday. I can find her. I hope she's alive and well. Whatever it is, she's still my 16-year-old little sister, and I don't want her to get hurt.
I'll always think of Leah as my first love. It just wasn't meant to be. It didn't seem fair to either one of us. I was going off to college halfway across the country. Even at that age, I knew long-distance relationships just didn't work. There may have been a small amount of selfishness involved in my decision, but I assumed Leah would be fine. I put it off as long as I could. With just a week left, I broke the news, and it didn't go well. I spent the entire night trying to convince her that it was for the best, but she never fully seemed to accept it, and things would just get messier from there on. I left that Friday and put that part of my life behind me. Classes kept me busy during the week, but I also worked hard to make friends. Meeting new people isn't hard when you live in the dorms. I was there maybe a month when I met Stacy. She was a sophomore living on the floor above me. We had a lot in common and began dating exclusively almost immediately. This was also about the time the letters started. It was like she knew that I'd met someone and wanted to destroy it. From then on, a week didn't pass without a letter from Leah. I read them and sometimes wrote back in the beginning, but they all began to sound the same after a point. When I returned home for Christmas, she showed up unannounced. She couldn't understand why I had stopped answering the letters. I had explained it over and over. The relationship was done, and it was past time to move on. I felt like I was speaking to a wall at that point. Not a single word got through to her, and I reached my boiling point. I told her to go away and never bother me again. I left her alone on that porch to cry herself out, and she finally left at around 4 a.m. I felt bad for doing things that way, but I just wanted it all to be over. If it took being cruel, so be it. She'd be better off in the long run, and the remainder of my holiday was quiet. I returned to school with a positive outlook and a renewed vigor. It finally appeared my Leah problem was solved, but instead, she escalated things to an entirely new level. Everything came to a head one night in my dorm room. Stacy and I were watching a movie with the lights off. There may have been a little light petting going on. I was occupied when Stacy started yelling. I looked up to see her pointing at the window. Through a small crack in the blinds, I could see a pair of eyes looking in. I grabbed the string and pulled the blinds up. Leah was standing there with a shocked look on her face. I called campus security without saying a word to her. She ran off, but was caught trying to get away a few minutes later. I was determined to end it right there and then, I intended to press charges and get a restraining order against her, and I urged Stacy to do the same. And to her credit, she came up with a better and less complex idea. When security asked what I wanted to do, I put it into Leah's hands. I promised I would take no further action if she promised to leave that second and never contact me or Stacy ever again. It was a big risk, but I was willing to take it. I guess there was still that small part of myself that felt guilty for the breakup. She reluctantly agreed, and the officers allowed her to leave. To be honest, I never expected her to keep the agreement. Nonetheless, it's been 9 years, and I've received no visits, texts, or phone calls from her. There was one short sympathy letter that she sent upon the death of my grandfather. I was so comforted by that thought that I just let it pass. I can't speak as to whether or not Stacy has heard anything, but I suspect that she's had the same experience. I did return home to work in my dad's company after college and have seen Leah around town on occasion, and we just do our best to avoid each other. I've been told in the intervening years that she is married and began a family, and I wish her all the luck in the world and hope the marriage proves to be a very long and happy one. My name is Nina, and I've officially decided to sit down and write up the story of something I witnessed way back during my first ever office job. When I first started, I was getting to know all of my coworkers. A guy named Peter stood out right away. Everyone was super nice to me, but Peter just ignored me, and then was kind of cold and rude when I went over to introduce myself. People said he was like that with everyone and not to let it bother me. He showed up to work, did his job, and then drove home again, all without sharing so much as a good morning with the rest of us. I guess that was just his way. I mean, I still thought that he was a jerk, but he was good at his job, and these days I'd rather work with a competent asshole than an incompetent friend. But then came the day when Peter started not being so good at his job. He started showing up late, looking like he hadn't slept, and when he started overrunning deadlines on a regular basis, management asked him if he wanted to take some vacation time to get himself together. We never found out what was going on with him, whether it was a medical thing or something going on at home, but Peter refused the time off and continued with his poor work performance. I've heard rumors that something was going to happen with him, whether it be a meeting with the bosses, suspension, or getting altogether fired. But it all came to a head one morning. Peter staggered into work smelling like a distillery. Word that Peter was drunk spread around the office like wildfire, and we were just waiting for something to happen when, finally, one of our bosses came out to talk to him. I don't know what she said to him exactly, but Peter responded by yelling out, "Just let me do my effing job." And then, without a word, she turned around, walked back into her office, and closed the door. A minute later, the big boss, a burly guy in his 50s, goes out and gives Peter a piece of his mind, telling him if he doesn't take a cab home immediately, emphasis on the cab part, then he was going to be fired on the spot. Peter started cursing out the boss, calling him all kinds of things I'd rather not repeat. Then our boss goes back to his office after announcing that he's going to call the cops. I hate to say it, it makes us sound kind of terrible in a way, but everyone in the office was just completely gripped. Someone was having a complete meltdown right there in front of us, and as sad and upsetting as it was, we were completely engrossed. And I kind of feel bad for Peter too. I don't think anyone in the office was enjoying what was going on. But Peter was drunk, and he sounded mad as hell too, so with the chances of things breaking out into violence being so high, I guess that's what had us all watching out of the corners of our eyes. Anyway, our big boss only came out of his office one more time to warn Peter that the cops are on their way, but Peter just tells him to go to hell. Then maybe 20 or 30 minutes later, the cops show up and ask Peter to leave. We were all watching by then. All the higher-ups had come out of their offices, Everyone was standing up over their cubicles or had wheeled their chairs around the side, all to watch poor old Peter get thrown out or potentially arrested. Someone, I didn't see who, said, "Just go, buddy, get some help." Not even in like an insulting way either. They were being genuine, I think. And Peter responded by screaming something back at them. And that's when the cops decided that he was going to jail. One of them started barking, "Stand up and put your hands behind your back," while the other reached for his cuffs and got them ready to put on Peter's wrists. But he still refused to budge and kept telling them to go F themselves. And that's when the struggle really started. One of the cops started trying to grab Pete's arms, and he started pulling them away and generally resisting. The other cop then got involved, and they both were trying to restrain Pete when suddenly he kind of twists and turns, and all you heard was one of the cops scream out, "He's got a gun! He's got a gun!" Someone, I don't know who, but it was one of my coworkers, shouted out, "Everybody down!" And that's what we did, almost instinctually. Everyone laying on the floor as fast as we could, and I remember praying that I wouldn't hear a gunshot, right up until I heard 3 loud bangs. This might sound odd to some American and non-American folks alike, but I never actually heard a gunshot until that day, and let me tell you, it's something I never want to be that close to ever again. I think maybe it was the enclosed space of the office, not that enclosed, but you get what I mean, combined with how terrified I was, that made the blast seem so loud, but it was easily the second most horrifying thing I'd ever witnessed. But then, the first most horrifying thing was what I saw when I finally stood up. I guess one of the cops had panicked, and instead of helping wrestle Peter's hand off the other cop's gun, he just pulled his own and shot him 3 times. I didn't see it at first. I just heard screaming and one lady yelling out, "Oh my God, oh my God," before she burst into tears and had to be taken away. I stayed down at first, thinking it was Pete that might have done the shooting, but then when I heard what sounded like the 2 cops talking to each other, I finally stood up and made the mistake of looking over in their direction. And there was a lot of blood. I didn't think a person could bleed that much and still be alive, but he was. Peter had somehow survived being shot 3 times up close, and seeing him move and try to breathe gave some people hope. The cop who shot him ended up walking out of the office sounding like he was about to cry, saying, "He had your gun, I swear to God he almost had your gun." Sometime after that, after they were able to stabilize him and the EMT showed up pretty quick, they put Peter on a stretcher and wheeled him out to the waiting ambulance outside. The rest of the day's work was canceled, and we found out that night that Peter had actually died on his way to the hospital. It was devastating. I didn't even know Peter all that well. I didn't even really like him, but finding out that he died was just so incredibly upsetting to me and everyone who'd worked with him. The office was closed for the rest of the week, but even when my coworkers started to head back over the month or so that followed, some took more time than others, I couldn't bring myself to go back to somewhere where someone had been killed. I think the thing that really gets me about it is that some people are shot by the cops after committing a crime or doing something that endangers people in some way, and others are shot for next to no reason at all from what I hear, but Pete was killed because he was just having a bad day. I know he went for the cop's gun, I guess, and some of my coworkers actually saw his hand reaching for it. I'm just saying that he didn't have to die like that. I don't know what I have done in that situation, or rather I do, but just hitting him might have resulted in Pete getting the cop's gun, and then who the hell knows what would have happened. Some of us might have even been killed if the gunfight broke out, and I just wish that things didn't have to be that way. And I know that probably sounds incredibly naive of me, but I really do wonder sometimes if I'd have given Pete a big old hug that morning, if things would have gone a little different.
Hey guys, Thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. Shush, I have to tell you something. I was going to the second floor when Bonnie suddenly appeared, grabbed my hand, and dragged me to the bathroom. She looked around for a bit and then locked it from inside. What is it? What are you doing? You know if someone were to see us, they will get the wrong idea. I started to panic because it was the women's bathroom where she dragged me. What I'm going to tell you is something very serious, so promise me that you won't tell anyone about it, she said, looking into my eyes with a dead serious look, which made my heart flutter a bit. Fine, I won't tell anyone, I said while looking away from her eyes. No, promise me first, she said, grabbing my face and turning it toward her by making me look into her eyes. Okay, I promise, I said while pulling myself away from her grip. You know my friend Martha, who works as a receptionist in A block. She again grabbed my face and made me look into her eyes. Yeah, what about her? And please speak without grabbing my face. My ears are just fine. I grabbed her hand and said while holding it. She is being harassed by someone from a high position, she said, looking all concerned. What? She's being harassed? Who told you this? I asked her in disbelief, because our company had a strict no harassment policy for everyone, and if someone felt threatened, they could report it. I saw bruises on her back and took her to the cafe to ask her. She just wouldn't stop crying, but she did not tell me who's doing this to her, she said. Why have you not reported it yet? I asked. Did you not hear me earlier? It's someone working at a higher position, and if she cannot report it, it then means that they have influence to affect the decision of the security department as well, she said and took out her phone. What are you doing on your phone? I looked at her phone and asked. I sneakily recorded half of Martha's conversation so I can report it for her instead, she said and started to type something. What do you think you're doing? I snatched her phone away from her hand. I'm mailing this to the director, she said with a brave, innocent look in her eyes, which made me want to kiss her and at the same time bump my head purposely on the wall. What if the director is the one harassing her? Don't forget that most of these meetings are held in that place. I erased the message she was typing and handed the phone back to her. That was when someone started knocking on the door. I got nervous and looked at her helplessly because if we were to get caught, we would be in a hell of a lot of trouble. Sorry, it's me, Bonnie. I had a period disaster, so it can take a bit longer. Can you please use the bathroom on the upper floor? Thank you in advance, she shouted without waiting for a response. I looked at her in disbelief, and as I was about to open my mouth, she covered it with her small hand and placed a finger over her lips, signaling me to shut up. I think she's gone. She waited for a while and then removed her hands. I know, so please check if anyone is outside and let me go. I'll slip into the smoking area and no one will notice, I said. She nodded in response and slightly opened the bathroom door to look around. You can go now. There's no one outside. And meet me after the office so that we can come up with a plan, she whispered in my ears, and then let me go. I anxiously left the bathroom and went directly to the smoking area. I finally took a sigh of relief when I noticed that there was no one around. There was no surveillance cameras near the bathroom and smoking area, and they were so close, so it was the safest place. After a while, I went back to work and tried to focus on that, but I could not stop thinking about how close Bonnie was to me, and that it was so hard to think straight and focus on what she was saying. Still, I managed to do that. After work, I headed out first and called Bonnie. She told me that she was already waiting for me in the park near the coffee place. I immediately drove there and saw her sitting on a bench, and as soon as I reached there, she told me that she had already thought of a plan by then. I was impressed. But then I remembered it was Bonnie, and her ideas were also pretty bizarre. So I thought it'd be best if I hear it out first, then concluding that we should apply it. I was surprised to hear the idea was pretty good this time. All I had to do was buy her the micro hidden camera and fit it into a necklace. The next day, I told Bonnie that the necklace she wanted would arrive by tomorrow morning, and she just nodded her head. We decided not to speak that much with each other in the office, so no one suspects anything. Well, it was Bonnie's idea, and unnecessary because everyone in the office knew we were childhood friends. So now they were thinking that either we had a major fight or we have started to date, which by the way I made clear, saying that we had a fight and Bonnie was angry with me. They pretty much believed my lie, and I wasn't that surprised either. When the necklace was delivered, I called her to my place and gave it to her. The next morning, she gifted it to Martha and made her wear it forcefully. But Martha was naive, and she did not suspect a thing. She technically threatened her to keep wearing it at all times no matter what, because it's a symbol of their friendship. After that, she let her go to work. Trust me when I say that sometimes Bonnie scares me. 2 days later, Bonnie went ahead and asked Martha to give the necklace back to her, but she gave her an excuse, saying the necklace she wanted to gift her was exchanged by someone else's, and that person was asking for it back. I don't know where she came up with such excuses, but what surprised me even more was that Martha believed her and gave it back. The necklace had a hidden camera, and there was a chip in it that had recorded everything that had happened with Martha for the past 2 days. She removed the chip from the necklace and then took it home with her to search for evidence. That night, I got a call from her around 11:58 p.m., and she told me that she found the person who was harassing Martha. I suggested she tell Martha about it first before risking everything and exposing that person with her permission. The next day, we called Martha to the same park and told her about everything. She started crying and begged us to release the video on the office's online forum because she was tired and fed up with all of this. She told us that she was thinking of committing suicide today if we did not call her. We posted the video anonymously, and everyone, including directors, managers, and security heads, everyone saw it. It was the senior manager who managed the security department. We understood why she did not report it as soon as we saw the video. When we got to the office the next morning, someone came up and said, "Hey, do you know that senior manager of security not only got fired, but arrested as well for harassing an employee? He is a complete pervert. We don't know who the employee is because her face was blurred out in the video." As he said that, I looked over to Bonnie, who was focused on her work and smiling.
I got a few work-related stories from my hometown I can post. This first one happened when I was a 20-year-old college student. At the time, I worked in a, let's say, rustic-looking gas station. It wasn't a building by itself either. Rather, it acted more like a booth that was attached to a supermarket. The booth itself is located a bit off-site on the other side of this huge parking lot, but the supermarket owns it. The booth faces the store, but it has a huge woodland area directly behind it. The door to the booth faces left into the woods, and I know I'm being overly specific, but this is important. So the window in the booth is bulletproof, but only covers the front so you can't see directly to the left or right of the booth. At the time of this experience, I've been working at the station for maybe a few months, when all of a sudden, this nasty storm hit the area one night. The rain was so bad that you could barely see 10 feet in front of you, and it was flooding all over the place. But the supermarket, being desperate for money, refused to close the booth down, so I showed up for my typical 5 to 11 p.m. shift in the pouring rain. 3 hours into my shift, the power goes out due to the storm, which by this point has gotten downright apocalyptic. It's pitch black out there, and the rain is coming down hard, so I decided to sit tight in the booth while I wait for a manager or something to either let me go or to fix the power. Of course, this means the phones are down, so I can't call in the store, and nobody in their right mind is buying gas, so I decided to start doing my booth chores like cleaning the counter, counting cigarettes, tidying the drawer, etc. Now, this next part will require a bit more background information, so bear with me. The booth itself is supposed to be locked at all times, but one of the new hires managed to break the key off inside the lock, making one of our managers break the lock so we all could get back inside. That lock still hadn't been replaced, but we were told to pretend the door was still locked. The door still had a deadbolt, but I found it annoying to fool with, so I mostly just left it unlocked. Whenever I'd go to open the door, I'd pretend to put the key in and make an audible ksh sound like a lock being opened. Anyway, back to me sitting in the unlocked booth in the pitch black pouring rain. I'm in the middle of my chores when I hear something outside the booth, like a muffled sort of splashing sound. Again, there is zero visibility, so I press my ear against the door and I can clearly hear someone walking around the booth in the rain before stopping in front of the door. Before I can kick myself for not locking it, I hear that ksh sound, followed by the most dreadfully quiet couple of seconds. I'm just waiting to die at the hands of some deranged serial killer or crackhead, when suddenly the footsteps start splashing back into the woods. I quietly soil myself as I race to lock the deadbolt and I wait out my shift. I would occasionally hear the footsteps outside, but it never tried to open the door. Finally, my manager drives over in a truck to close me out for the night. Since I'm still kind of new here, I didn't want to seem like I was delusional or crazy or that I was a crackhead, so I never mentioned it to him or anyone else at the store. A few months later, this kid I was training told me he'd heard footsteps real late one night during a storm, and thankfully, the lock had been replaced since then. I just tell him it was nothing, but not to open the door if he thinks there is something out there. Not because I didn't want to look delusional, but because I can't explain this phenomenon. Now fast forward a couple of months, and I'm still working at the booth. By this point, I'm the second oldest person working there, so sometimes I'd get calls from younger coworkers when they accidentally mess up. On this particular night I was off, but I still got a call from this high schooler who I'll call Rhea. I look at the time and it's 9:30, so I sigh and pick up the phone, and before I can even get in a what happened, Rhea is in hysterics, saying something about her trainee being missing, and then lots of sobbing. Confused, if not a little agitated that she called me first, I try to get her to call the cops or something if he's been kidnapped, but she insists that she can't call the cops because they wouldn't believe her. So, my next line of thinking is to ask her why she hasn't told a manager, and she cries some more and says that they wouldn't understand. More agitated than confused, I agreed to go out there and calm her down. I get dressed, go out there, and park next to the booth. There were no customers around, and the girl was just standing in the booth, staring at the door. She spots me, opens the door, and starts sobbing, telling me to hurry inside. Eventually, I got her to stop crying long enough to tell me what happened. Apparently, she was training this new guy, Matt, who was an older guy about my age, and she said, the dude felt off, like a robot or something, and kept staring at her all dazed. Several times he would stop talking mid-sentence and ignored her attempts to address it. At this point, she's getting real uncomfortable and is about to call into the store about him when he starts sort of humming, she says. She described it as kind of like as if someone was attempting to imitate a purring cat, like they were breathing heavily and buzzing at the same time. So she reaches for the phone, and he reacts by grabbing her hand and just staring at her. She starts bawling at this point, begging him to stop, and he lets go of her hand, then opens the door and just sprints off into the woods out of sight. She said he came back a few minutes just before I got there and asked to be let back in, but she refused, so he just ran back into the woods. At this point, I'm either thinking he picked up on the meth phase that the neighborhood was slinging around, or that she's being dramatic. Regardless, the story sounded pretty dangerous, and we needed to call the cops or something at least. I tell her we're going to call the cops, and then we're going to walk outside and wait for them, but she doesn't want to go outside. She says that she can almost feel him waiting out there. Tired, irritated, and not really buying the story, I just say screw it. She can stay in the booth and call the cops while I make sure the tree line is clear. I take this weak little flashlight that I stashed out there after the first story and go outside to start scanning the tree line. I barely begin shining the light around when suddenly the hair stands up on the back of my neck as I hear this humming noise. She described it rather well too, because it sounded kind of like cicadas mixed with breathing. I look inside the booth and she's curled up in the chair, staring to my left. I didn't even look where she was staring, I just immediately booked it back to get inside. But I left the keys with her, and she's not getting up to let me in. I'm pounding on the door while screaming at her to let me in, and the humming stops abruptly as I hear something behind me and to the left. It's Matt. He's standing just on the edge of the trees. My panic intensifies, and at this point, Rhea finally lets me into the booth, and I immediately deadbolt the thing shut. All of a sudden, Matt is right outside asking to be let back in. He says he's sorry, and that he got a bit nervous back there, and he begins circling the booth while he just repeats the same couple of excuses, asking to come in. This continues for maybe 5 minutes before the cops arrive, and Matt just begins to run off into the woods again. I end up having to explain to both the cops and our manager what happened, leaving out the weird humming. As far as I know, Matt never showed up, so they fired him and Rhea quit eventually, and that was the end of it. I was never particularly close to Rhea since she was still in high school when I was in college, so we never got to talk about what happened. I have no idea what happened that night though. Maybe Matt was just some doped up meth junkie who was capable of making some really weird noises. I'll never know. I guess it could explain why he bolted out of there when the cops began to show up, but that day is still quite a mystery to my mind. This happened fairly recently. I was trying to get a train to the city for a night of drinking with some friends. Unfortunately, the trains weren't running to the city center that day for some reason, so they had a replacement bus service instead. And so off I toddled looking for where they'd hidden the replacement buses in the train station. After a while, it seemed like I was on the right track, and just as I'd found a very promising corridor, I heard running footsteps coming from behind me. I glanced round to find an Arabic man sprinting to a stop beside me. I know he was Arabic because he tried to offer to teach me Arabic while I was trapped with him later on. He asked me if I knew where the replacement bus service was. I replied that I was probably just as lost as he was and that I was just trying to find it myself. I thought that that would be the end of our interaction, but he continued walking beside me. Fair enough, I thought. We're both looking for the same thing, so maybe he thinks we stand a better chance of finding it together. I wish I'd turned around and darted into the bathroom or something. And it turned out that the corridor did lead to the replacement bus, and the driver was standing outside the doors. He assured us that we had plenty of time and were the first ones here. He opened the doors to let us in, and the bus was completely empty. I decided to take a random seat in the middle and huddled up next to the window, ready to put my headphones on. But where does this guy choose to sit in the completely empty bus? Right next to me, trapping me in the row of seats. I thought it was a little weird at the time, but figured no harm would come of it. He asks me why I'm headed to the city center. I tell him I'm meeting friends there for a girls' night out, and then very pointedly put my headphones on and start finding a good song to listen to. He insists that he could join us, and I tell him it's girls only and I don't really know him. He answered that we could get to know each other and he'll buy me a drink. I tell him no thanks, I just want to see my friends today. The bus has gotten moving at this point, and there are a few others on board, and from there he proceeds to badger me with questions, all of which I ignore or give one-word answers to. After a bunch of them, my replies become variations of, I just want to listen to my music now, and I'm not interested in talking, sorry. He starts complimenting my body, telling me he thinks I'm beautiful and repeating over and over, I really like you. My only responses now are, leave me alone, every so often, and I'm visibly shrinking away from him as he's leaning closer. The bus driver doesn't seem to know where he's going for his next stop, and the city center is ages away. I'm trapped in the seat and starting to really panic. He starts stepping up to I love yous and leans right up to me, making kissy sounds with his lips. And that was the moment my hero intervened. It was a man around my age sitting a few seats back, and I'll quote what I can remember of the conversation. Hey, excuse me, mate. She asked you multiple times to leave her alone. And through very gritted teeth, that creep tells him to F off. Oh, you need to move away from her. You're clearly bothering her. Do you mind your business? We're fine. And then to me, do you want him to move? And me, practically pinned against the window, getting scared. Yeah. And the creep gets up and storms up to the man. Do you want to fight? Do you want to go right now? Nah, I'd rather you control yourself and leave her alone. The creep is visibly ready to start throwing punches when the driver calls back if there's a problem and if he needs to kick anyone off the bus. The creep quietly says no and moves a few seats behind my hero, much to my relief. And I mouth several thank yous to my hero, who just smiles like it was no big deal. The creep tries following me off the bus, but my friends meet with me, and so he walks off. But I'm just so glad that my hero intervened when he did.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. This happened 5 years ago, and I can still remember it vividly. I was excitedly preparing for the New Year's party, and I decided to buy some decorations online. As I was scrolling through the website, I suddenly felt a weird sensation, almost as if I was being watched. It was a strange feeling because I was inside the safety of my home, and I lived alone. I tried to shake it off as my imagination and continued browsing, but the feeling persisted. Hours passed, and I could still feel as if I was being watched. It was now becoming too much for me to ignore, and I got up from the couch and started looking around the house. I checked all the rooms, closets, and even the attic, but there was no one there. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but the feeling persisted. While browsing through the shopping website, I could still feel an uneasy and ominous feeling in the pit of my stomach. I tried calling my friend Natalie for some comfort, but she didn't answer. The clock was ticking, and the sun had already set. I was starting to feel increasingly unsafe in my own house. I needed to find a trustworthy person to spend the night with, but my contact list was of no use. In a state of desperation, I finally called my sister Emily, hoping she would come to my rescue. The clock was ticking as I waited for my sisters to arrive, and as the night progressed, I started feeling increasingly unsafe in my own home. Every creak and sound made me jump out of my skin. As I waited for my sister to arrive, the feeling of being watched lingered. I brushed it off as mere paranoia and continued to sit in the living room, trying to distract myself by watching TV. But the feeling persisted, like an invisible presence lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. Suddenly, the familiar sound of my phone's notification bell chimed, breaking the silence and drawing my attention to the screen. It was a message from my sister Emily, announcing her arrival with a short and sweet message, "I'm here." With that, the doorbell rang, and I quickly rushed to open the door, feeling relieved that someone was finally here to share that eerie feeling with me. As Emily entered the room, I couldn't help but notice the stern expression on her face. Her first sentence caught me off guard. "Just remember this. I'm not here because I was worried about you or was bored at my place. I'm here to do you a favor." Despite her initial statement, I was grateful that she had come to visit me and offered her help. After catching up with my sister, we decided to do something to pass the time together. We eventually opted to unwind by watching a movie for the evening. However, as the movie progressed, an insidious feeling crept over me, as if something was not quite right in my home. Without warning, Emily suddenly broke the silence by saying, "Is there someone else here?" I felt a chill run down my spine upon hearing her say that, because I was feeling the presence in my home, and she must have felt it too. I shook my head to indicate a negative answer, and as she stared at my expression, her intuitive mind immediately grasped the reason for my call. It was then that I noticed a slight movement out the corner of my eye. I hesitantly turned my head in that direction, but to my surprise, there was nothing there. It was at that moment when Emily tapped on my shoulder before pointing toward the long curtain that was all the way at the end of the hall beside the windows. We both noticed that the curtain was moving, but there wasn't any wind blowing through the windows. My heart started to race as Emily quickly grabbed a vase, and I too looked around for anything I could use as a weapon before we cautiously made our way towards the moving curtain. My heart raced as we silently pulled the curtain together, hoping to find the place empty. However, as soon as the curtains parted, my eyes widened in horror. There, lurking in the shadows, was my ex-boyfriend. I couldn't tell how long he had been there, but the thought of him watching me made my skin crawl. My mind raced with questions. What did he want? Why was he there? I felt a mix of fear and anger, unsure of how to react. My sister and I tried to remain calm, but as the reality of the situation set in, fear took hold. He was about to hit us and run, but before he could do that, Emily took action and hit him on the head with the vase she was holding. As he passed out, we called 911 and waited anxiously for the police to arrive. When they did, they escorted my ex-boyfriend out for questioning, but the damage had already been done. The night of the incident left my sister and me deeply unsettled and apprehensive. We clung to each other, too terrified to even think of falling asleep. My home, once a comforting sanctuary, now felt like a menacing presence, and we couldn't shake off the sense of danger that seemed to lurk in every corner. Every creak and rustle amplified our fear, and we couldn't shake off the feeling that someone was still hiding in the shadows, watching us with malicious intent. The following day, I hastily packed my belongings and fled to Emily's house. The New Year party that I had been planning was scheduled to take place there that year, and while nothing untoward occurred after the incident, I couldn't help but feel anxious and on edge. I never would have guessed that my ex-boyfriend would turn out to be a stalker. It was a sobering reminder that people's true colors can be difficult to discern, and I was grateful that I'd broken up with him when I did.
I have been helping deliver newspapers since my dad started as a carrier when I was 6. Eventually, my dad was given his own distribution center, so when I turned 16 and got my license, I started doing them on my own. Most of the people in the depot have been there for years. They've watched me grow up, and I consider many of them an extended part of my family. We spent every holiday together. The newspaper never had a day off. Countless birthdays. But there was one guy who always gave me the major creeps. I was about 14 when he started, I think. I used to hang out in the back office with some of my other friends as the years went on, and he always hung out back there because he was also friends with these people. At least that's what I thought. One of them recently told me they only tolerated him. I never spoke to him because something just felt really off about the guy, but nothing happened until last year. I moved home following my graduation from college. I was already having a hard time readjusting because I no longer had any friends in the area and I was missing my college town. Creepy guy that I'll just call B started hanging around me a lot. He had a weird man crush on my dad too, always buying him extra gifts for birthdays and holidays, sucking up majorly. I did my usual nice greeting, keep to myself stuff. But then he started buying me gifts for no reason. My mom told me to just keep them because it was all stuff I liked, Marvel and cat-themed things. That was probably my first mistake. He started acting like we were BFFs and coming out to find me while I was sitting in my car and talking about how I deserve so much more than being trapped here at the depot and that he will do whatever it takes to get me out of here because he really cared about me and I deserve so much more. I never really acknowledged it because I thought it was really weird, and I thought if I just kind of nodded quickly he'd go away. This went on for weeks. Then he started texting me, telling me to sleep well after work and just being generally really creepy. I should probably mention I was 22 at the time, and this guy is well into his 40s. I started avoiding him, and he kept leaving things on my bench. I came in one day, and there were cat posters taped along the back of my bench. I kept taking them down, but they'd be back up the next day. When I started avoiding him, he made a Facebook group chat with me and my dad complaining about every little thing and just being a major jerk. He made a really rude remark about my friend who was visiting from Germany, so I blocked him on Facebook because I wasn't going to deal with it anymore. B made a new Facebook and remade the group chat just to keep doing it. I went away for a while on a vacation to visit my childhood friend in Washington, and when I got back, he was calling me by my full name, which I absolutely hate. I was tired and jet lagged, so I went off on him, and he whipped around and blew up 3 times worse, telling me I was all these terrible names, and I thought I was so perfect because I was the boss's daughter, and there was no one there as perfect as him. My jet-lagged brain broke down after he walked away. I'm glad I held on till he left, but I stormed out to my car and told all my guy friends to keep him as far away from me as possible because I was so fed up. He started texting my brothers, asking if they were on his side and if they had his back over mine. My roommate, who was a guy, started getting threatening texts from him about wanting to fight over me. Everything was spiraling out of control. My dad made us sit down at the local Denny's one morning to work everything out because he was so sick of B blowing up his phone. When my dad was there, things were fine. B said he wasn't mad at me, but I was just the catalyst the day of the fight and whatever. My dad left to pay the bill, and suddenly B's attitude changed. I was in the wrong, and treated him terribly, and all he ever did was love me, and I treated him so poorly. He kept trying to hold my hands over the table, telling me he loved me over and over. I put on a polite show because I just wanted this to end, and thought if I was nice about it, things would be different. Apparently my answer to everything is be nice and it'll go away. He walked me to my car after the conversation at Denny's and asked if I noticed anything different. I told him no, and he got agitated. Apparently he spent a lot of money on Captain America clothing, everything from a hat to shoes. I told him I didn't notice clothing like ever, and B got increasingly angry, telling me he did it to feel better about himself and impress me. Cap is my favorite superhero. I didn't even know he knew that. He had left the depot for a while, and when he asked to come back, I told my dad's manager I knew we were desperate, and I would be okay if I didn't have to talk to him. I wore headphones every day, my music full blast so I couldn't hear anything over them. He kept coming to my bench and would stand there waiting for me to acknowledge him, and he'd storm off angry when I didn't. He would glare at me if I ever talked to any other carrier, even though I'd been friends with many of them for years. My tipping point was something I found out after the fact. My guy roommate had gone to the grocery store late one Sunday. When he was walking to his car, he noticed some guy watching him. The guy watched him as he loaded the car and smoked a cigarette, and that's when my roommate realized it was B. My roommate got in his car and started driving home, and he noticed B was following him. He tried taking several wrong turns, and every time B followed. My roommate called his friend and said he was coming over, and when he said so, to open the garage to make it look like he lived there. When my roommate met his friend in the house, he told him everything, and they watched him drive by the house 8 times before leaving. No one called the police. I feel like that was the only thing that justified calling the police, because the harassment and stuff couldn't justify police action. I knew that from years of watching crime shows, and I was angry when I found out that no one called. I told my dad I wanted him gone. I couldn't take it anymore. Texts are easy to avoid, but now he was stalking us to try and figure out where I lived, since I wasn't living at home but renting a house with my brother and our friend. I spent months watching over my shoulder whenever I went to the store, worried he'd follow me home. After, he started going to my parents' house a lot because he knew where they lived, like he was waiting for me to be there one day. No one was taking this seriously. The gifts continued, and my mom kept telling me it was free stuff and to just keep it. But the gifts always came after something bad, and it was feeling oddly like an abusive relationship. Oh no, you're angry? Here's a gift to make you forget and like me again. My mom felt that way till her birthday, and a giant bouquet of roses and a teddy bear appeared at her job from B. We didn't even know he knew where she worked. After that, he started cornering me in the parking lot. I told him he'd been told to stay away from me, and I'd appreciate it if he listened. "Look," he said, "I'm sorry I took you for granted. I never should have done that. Are we okay now?" I was floored. I told him if he thought that's why I was avoiding him, he was more insane than I thought. After that, he was done at the depot, and I didn't see him for a while. A couple times I definitely saw him driving around on my route, but I couldn't prove it to a cop if I called it in. The last time I saw him, I was at my second job. I worked in a music store at a local mall. I was messing around with my coworkers when I turned around and saw him watching me from our hip-hop section. My stomach dropped. I almost collapsed and I started panicking. I ran him back and told my coworkers. They agreed if he asked they didn't know who I was, and I could stay in the back till he left. I was a manager, but I didn't think I could actually kick him out because he was just watching me. My coworkers said he was there for almost 2 hours just wandering around. Never bought anything. It was like he was trying to wait me out, figuring I had to go back out front eventually. He texts my dad now and then, trying to get his job back and fix things. My mom told him if he ever came near us again, she'd call the cops. When my dad wouldn't take him back, he started showing up at my uncle's depot and then started a group chat with him and my dad, saying they needed to sit down and talk. I was with my dad when my uncle called him about it. My dad called everything a misunderstanding. I said I didn't classify stalking as a misunderstanding. That day he came to my other job, I decided I was moving back to my college town 3 hours away. Home no longer felt like home. I didn't feel safe going anywhere. I still worry one day he's just going to show up in my new city. I transferred to the music store there. I had worked with these people my senior year of college, and they have looked out for me even after I moved. They all know the story, and I know they would all fight for me if it came down to it, so I feel safe, but I still panic when we walk to our cars after dark and have to check the parking lot to make sure he isn't there. It's been almost a year. and all I can say is I hope I never see him again.
While I was in the 7th grade, going from my school in the downtown area of my city to my house, the buses usually are composed of a certain constant demographic. The teenagers coming back from school, the working class adults and single mothers with their children trying to save a buck by using the bus. In addition to this demographic, there are the two types of disturbances: drug addicts or alcoholics that are loud and disruptive, usually begging for $1 in the middle-aged man, or her predator preying on middle schoolers or young women, both of which I have had my own encounters with. But today's story is not my own experience. I did have a front row seat this crazy encounter though. Now that we have the exposition, on to the story. I find a seat near the end of the bus by myself. Because of the way the buses work, there's one row on each side of the bus, with each seat has 2 sitting spaces. But there's also a twisty area in the middle of the bus. 2 seats are directly across from each other in this area. On the opposite side of me is a working class man, some teenagers behind me, and in front of me are the main characters of the story: a dingy, unshaven man and 3 teenage girls. The man being directly in front of me and the girls in the twisty seats in front of the man. Being that there's only 2 per seat, one of the girls decided to sit on one of her friend's laps to stay close and not have to sit beside a stranger. Upon seeing this, the man begins to sort of creepily laugh to himself before obnoxiously adjusting the way he's sitting in a suggestive manner, rubbing his thighs and staring the girl down. As the ride begins and the girl notices him, he starts to pat his thighs if to suggest she sit down there, then leading to verbalize these actions, saying things like, "Come here, girl. Come sit here instead. You belong right here." Everyone inside of this disgusting behavior catches on, and they're all watching him. The girl simply scouted the man and turns away, her friends throwing light insults at him. He attempts in vain. He turns to the working class man who's watching what's going on. He then says something along the lines of, "Why is she sitting there? She needs to be on my lap instead." Further commenting on his high schooler's body and doing the buddy-buddy arm nudge with him as if the two were pals. Just a note, she is visibly a high schooler. Our district requires standard school attire, so she has khaki shorts and button-up short-sleeve shirt with a backpack, so there's no way that this man couldn't have known that she was underage. But I digress. Anyways, hearing these outrageous statements for the man, the working class man replies with something like, "Hey, don't you ever associate with me. Whatever you think this is a child you're talking about. I come from Detroit, and we put people like you in the dirt." The man not at all deterred scoffs and does his hand-flinging motion as if to blow him off. The working class man stops his coming up, and as he stands, he tells the girl that he apologizes for what she's going through and leaves. The girl tells him on his way out, "Thank you, but I'll be able to handle it. Just kind of wait." The gross man turns back there and says, "Handle what? Handle what? Me?" and laughs to himself. I was appalled at this gross statement, but even angrier than me were the adults and male thugs who started standing in the area where the situation was, witness to this atrocity. I remember hearing the gang members all start to get riled up behind me in defense of the girl. Now this guy starts to get a bit scared. He's now stopped talking upon seeing how many people are against him. The girl again goes on to assure the crowd that she's got everything under control, and things calm down a bit. This until he pulls the string to notify the driver that he wants to leave at the next stop. In a split second, everyone's eyes were back on him. The thugs begin standing up, lingering near the doors just in case he plans to run. The bus begins to arrive to the stop, and as the man stands up, so does the girl. He attempts to walk past her, but upon approaching her, she pushes him back not to get him off his feet, but they just get back him from the forming group of people. She does this because as he stumbles backward like Django, she swings her belt off her waist and yells, "He likes to prey on little girls. He liked flirting with little girls as a grown man," and starts beating the brakes off the sky with it. And yes, she was using the metal side. My ears filled with the clinking of metal on his body and head, the slapping of the leather on the skin, and the moans and cries of this fall. The grown man who is now on the ground in tears attempting to escape from this well-deserved beating. The bus ends up completely stomping the driver, running back to separate the two. The girl is still beating the man with all her might as the bus driver rushes over to pick her up and pull her away from the man. The man ends up crawling hands and knees off the bus, where he then laid on the concrete moaning and crying in pain. Everyone was escorted off the bus, and the police were soon called to get the man medical attention. And the police ended up detaining the girl, and I couldn't find any information about her charges. But I hope wherever she is, she's having a good day. As for the man, all I can say is just don't be a creep, and bad things won't happen to you. I admire that girl's bravery and the passengers that bonded together for the safety of the girl with the best demonstration of what a community should be that I've ever seen.
Before I officially started up my business, I used to work as like a general handyman, and on a very casual basis too. I was fresh out of the county and determined to turn myself around, but I barely had 2 cents to my name, so I just started hustling with whatever I could get my hands on. And about 6 months after, I had my own van, my own tools, and I had everything except a contractor's license. But that sure as hell didn't stop me from building my business and growing my revenue. About a year later, I was basically working on retainer for a landlord who operated multiple different properties across the city. Some were in nice areas, some were in not so nice areas, and I wasn't actually on retainer. We just joked that he gave me so much work that I might as well have been. Anyway, one day he asked me if I could fit some veneers on some old cabinets. So I tell him sure, get the address of the place that he wants me to visit, then headed over the very next morning to get it done. The tenant of the apartment I was working on had been asked to vacate while the work was going on, so I was free to do my thing, which for the most part consisted of applying a super strong adhesive to the cabinets before carefully fitting the veneers. I was about halfway through the job when I heard the key turning in the lock of the apartment's door. I waited until the tenant was within earshot, then called out an apology for the smell of the glue, which by that stage was still real strong and thick in the air. A second or so later, a woman of maybe 35 to 40 appeared in the doorway, and she looked at me with these big, wild eyes before asking me, "Where is it?" I was still halfway up a ladder at the time, so I'm halfway turned around on it when I ask her back, "Where's what?" Instead of answering me, she got really angry all of a sudden, stomped her way to the center of the room and told me word for word, "Tell me, or I'll kick you off that effing ladder." I start feeling incredibly vulnerable after that, so I start climbing down real fast in the hopes that she was only bluffing, or if she does kick the ladder, then I'll have less of a fall and less chance to really hurt myself. I expected some kind of confrontation when I got to the ground, so I can feel my adrenaline start kicking in as I stepped off that bottom rung and turned to face her. But by the time I did, she was gone. Gone in the sense that she was no longer in front of me, and gone in the sense that whoever I had just been talking to was gone too. She dropped to her knees, grabbed the open tube of adhesive that I'd been using, and started to sniff up these deep huffs of the fumes into her nose. I must have asked her something like, "What the hell, lady?" and then reached down to take her by the shoulder to try to pull her away from it. But the second I touched her, she turned and there was a totally different person looking back at me. The lady that walked into her apartment had been rude and confrontational, but the lady staring back at me now looked like she could have ripped out my liver, eaten it raw, and then asked for seconds. She screamed, "Get your effing hands off of me," shoved me, then went right back to huffing the tube of industrial strength adhesive that I had sitting at the bottom of the ladder. And I'm serious when I say it was like a transformation. Her eyes were different, still angry but full of something else too. She was like a mountain lion if a person got too close to her cubs, completely rabid, and even though she was small enough for me to toss, I got to admit that in that moment, I was goddamn terrified. She kept on huffing and puffing on that tube of glue until all that rage just seemed to wash away from her. Then once she was done, and with the tube of glue still in her hand, she got up, walked over to her couch, and just plopped herself down and lay there looking all blissed out like she didn't even know where she was. I remember telling her that I was going to get my stuff and put it in the van and get the hell out of there, and that she'd have to deal with her landlord if she wanted the rest of the cabinet veneers fitted. She just groaned at me and waved her arm as if to say, "Just go away already." And so I did. With her lying there like a zombie, I packed up my stuff and got the hell out of there before she decided that she wanted to help herself to the rest of my gear. I left her with that tube of adhesive too. That stuff can be expensive, but there was no way that I was about to risk getting my face ripped off by trying to pull it out of her hand. So I pack up my gear, trying to carry as much as possible out to the van just in case the glue-sniffing tenant decided to steal something. I managed to get everything except my ladder under my arms. Then on the way out, I started hearing this kid crying. There's no telling how long they'd been wailing, but I guess I just filtered it out into background noise while I was trying to keep from getting shredded by that crazy glue sniffer lady. But then when I step outside, I see where the crying was coming from. There was a car right there on the curb with both the driver's side and rear passenger door open. In the back, there was a kid still strapped into the car seat, and it was screaming out, "Mommy, Mommy," over and over again. There were grocery bags sat in the pathway to the apartment too, like the woman had gotten home, saw the van and rushed inside after abandoning both her grocery bags and her kid. Maybe she just forgot that I was stopping by that day and rushed inside to check it out before bringing her kid and groceries inside. I'm not sure. But either way, she walked in, the smell of the adhesives hit her, and that's all that she had in her mind. And that was the scariest thing of all. Way scarier than the prospect of getting my face chewed off by this crazy lady. This woman was such a degenerate drug addict that one little whiff of industrial strength adhesive and she was gone. Hell, she might have been Mother of the Year before she walked into that room, and then just boom, she was just right back to the bottom of the barrel getting high all over again. I don't honestly know what her situation was, and I shouldn't speculate. I just hope her kid ended up okay, because with a mother like that, life sure is gonna be an uphill struggle.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
I used to work at a small elevator manufacturing company in data management back in 2021. And since this was my first job, I wanted to get as much experience as I could. But after working for a year and a half, I realized not everything is what it seems to be. They had a client with mall chains that had placed orders for almost 20 elevators by now in that company. But there was something that was going on in the company that he had no idea about. I happened to find out about it by mistake and was keeping quiet about it since I didn't want any problems with my work. That day, I got to the office a bit early and decided to take a walk around the building when I overheard the manager who was in charge of that client's order, talking to an inspector and offering him some bribe to lie to the client about the authenticity of the materials installed in the elevators. I couldn't believe what I just heard. This meant he was messing with the company's fund right under the CEO's nose. It's been almost 2 months since I found out, and since I knew he had enough authority to fire me before he could get fired himself, I tried to stay ignorant of what I heard that day, hoping for his lies to get exposed by some other means. And luckily, the client gave the annual maintenance contract for one of the lifts to a different company, which shed light on the usage of counterfeits. And it was not just only small parts, but the drive and machine as well. Our company started to receive angry phone calls the moment he found out the truth, and judging by the horrid expression on the manager's face, he was screwed. I was low-key enjoying this turn of events, since I was not the only one who knew of this now. It was like my prayers were listened to, and his corruption was finally revealed to the others. Anyway, so after many threatening calls received by employees on the manager's behalf, a one-on-one meeting was scheduled between the client and him. It was finally the day of the client's visit, and I was looking forward to the kick in the teeth he was going to receive for his wrongdoings. And judging by the surrounding, I wasn't the only one who was secretly enjoying his affliction. It seemed like other employees were also looking forward to his fall. Well, looking back at his nasty personality and the insults he had thrown at others, it was only right to do so. But there must be others who were involved in his scheme as well, since such a large-scale fraud right under everyone's nose was not something he could do alone. And there was that inspector as well, whom he was offering a bribe. We all saw the tall man with amber eyes getting escorted in by security, along with what looked like 3 bodyguards of his own. Well, it was something to be expected from someone who owned malls, so none of us were surprised by that. But since only he was permitted to enter the meeting room, the men he brought stood outside the room. The sweat drops on the manager's forehead were visible even from a distance as I saw him entering to meet the client, but he was trying his best to act nonchalantly. We wanted to hear what they were going to talk, so we moved a bit closer to the meeting room, and figuring from what broken words we were able to hear, the man was angrily demanding he inspects each elevator our company had installed and replace the knockoffs to the branded ones as per agreement he signed with the company. For those of you who don't know, the company that installs the elevator holds the key until the official handover, and there were only 2 or 3 elevators that had been completely handed over to this client. And I was sure about the first 2 elevators that were installed mustn't have been tampered with, since a different manager was in charge of them. After the client was pleased with the smooth performance of those elevators, he signed a contract for the rest of his malls. The project was given to this greedy hyena of a manager who decided to embezzle with the company's funds to fill his pocket, thinking no one would ever find out since customers have less to no knowledge of the materials used inside the elevator. So, the manager continued to deny doing what the man was claiming, while saying that there was nothing wrong with those elevators, that the agreed materials were used in the installation. But when the man continued insisting on the inspection, he tried to change strategy by saying he would send an inspector through the company. Judging by the voice of the client that was slowly getting louder, he was losing his patience when he said he would bring his inspector, and all he needed were the keys to his elevator. We didn't need to stay close to the meeting room to hear what was going on, since it seemed like the conversation had turned into a heated argument where the manager was desperately denying to give the keys and continued saying that only the company's inspector was allowed to check on the lifts. He finally lost it, and now we were listening to the sound of punches being thrown. Since no one dared to step in, and there was no one in a higher position than the manager present at the moment, we let the fight continue. After about another 15 minutes or so, the man exited the room, looking like an angry Hulk. There was blood on his knuckles, and he strode off to the exit while his bodyguards followed him. We immediately rushed into the meeting room to see the condition of the manager, and he seemed pretty beat up as his face looked unrecognizable and was unconscious. Not only that, but he was bleeding through his head. It looked as if he was a victim of an assault. Well, judging by the vast difference between the two's height and build, it was predictable that he would get smashed by the other party. Anyway, he was immediately taken to the hospital, and this issue had already reached the CEO's ears, who was in a completely different state for a meeting with a possible investor. We were informed that he would be coming back the very next day to resolve this issue by himself, while, on the other hand, the corrupt manager had gone into a vegetative state due to the seriousness of his head injury. Not that I cared, but the doctors couldn't tell when he would wake, and if he did, there was a huge chance he would have an issue in speaking. Another meeting was held between the client and the CEO, and this one was rather calm than the previous fiasco. The CEO agreed to the inspection as per the man's condition, while apologizing and saying he had no idea that an employee was playing with the company's trust, and offered to replace the part with the one that was mentioned in the contract. The manager's company was sent a letter of his release from duty, along with the warning that the company was not pressing any charges for the fund embezzlement due to his condition, and they can think of the money he stole as compensation. Every single employee was investigated after that, and it turned out there were more people involved than I thought in this, and every single one of them was fired and sued for stealing from the company. I worked for another 6 months before moving to a better opportunity the moment I got it, and I hope I don't get entangled in something like that ever again. But as I am moving forward in life, I am getting to know there are all kinds of selfish people in this world, and you gotta watch out for them.
I believe it was the summer before I started high school. My mom's cleaning company was short a maid or two. She figured it made more sense to make me work for my money rather than just hand over a bit every time I asked. Maybe she thought it would teach me the value of $1. I'm not sure. Whatever her motivations, I was hired to cover the phones. This was a test to see if I could handle the workload. I must have passed because I was moved over to cleaning once the school year began. 5 days a week after school and all day Saturdays, I followed her and the other girls around town cleaning people's homes and offices. This routine continued for 4 years of high school and college. At the end of it all, I had a business degree and a 50% piece in the company. Another 10 years would pass, and as Mom would step further away from the day-to-day running of the operations, I would take on more responsibility. Until one day when she handed me her keys and wished me good luck. The business became mine, and with it, all its headaches and heartaches. I never completely stopped going out on jobs. The work kept me fit and in good standing with my clients. If I told you I enjoyed the actual job, I'd definitely be lying. However, by the time I left high school, I'd become almost disconnected from it. After 20 years of cleaning toilets and kitchens, I figured I'd seen it all and nothing could ever get to me. That was until the call for the Pearson job. The man who called sounded like a kind and amiable old man, if not a bit spacey. It took a moment or two for him to get to his point, and it sounded like a run-of-the-mill house cleaning gig. What I saw when I arrived sticks with me to this day. I was met at the door by the old gentleman and led to a bedroom. The acrid scent coming from the room punched me in the gut and caused me to retch. While fighting the urge, I balked at the horrifying image before me. It appeared as if a tub full of blood had been splattered all about the room. The bed was by far the worst, soaked in an almost purple-tinted goo. One wall appeared to have a vast spray of blood and gray matter coating it. The horror of it overtook me, and I ran across the hall into a bathroom and barfed up my lunch. It took a few minutes to compose myself. I stormed from the bathroom and confronted the man about what I had just seen. He hung his head for a moment, at first mumbling an apology, then looking up toward me, quietly allowing a tear to fall from the corner of his eye. "I'm sorry, young lady. I know it's an awful sight. I should have warned you, but I was afraid you'd turn around and leave. My grandson..." He took a long, ragged breath and began again. "My grandson took his life this morning. He did it in that room. I can't even bear to go in there. I know it must be shocking, a shocking sight to see, but I didn't know who else to call. My insurance won't pay for it, and the other company I called, the one the police gave me the card for, they wanted far more than I could afford. I knew my wife had used your company many years ago, and I liked it. I guess I hoped you could help me." I wasn't sure what to say. I felt horrible for this poor man, but this type of work was way beyond my ability, not to mention my comfort level. Crime scene cleanup companies made more because they had to deal with bloodborne diseases and pathogens and had the proper chemicals to dispose of bodily fluids properly. We continued to stare at one another, unsure of what to say. His eyes were now filled with tears. It was obvious what I had to do. I asked the gentleman for the cleaner's card. I spoke to them a moment and hung up. Before I could get the words out, I began to get choked up myself. I cleared my throat and began once more. "It's all taken care of, sir. Your family's been a good client in the past, and it's the least I could do." At that moment, I didn't actually remember the family, but it seemed an easy way to explain what I was doing. Although right that second I wasn't sure why I was doing it. "You don't have to worry about it. Consider it a thank you for the loyalty to our company." The old man's eyes lit up when I said this. His face was now one big, wet mess. "I don't know how to thank you, young lady. I didn't think there were kind people like yourself around anymore." He lunged upon me and wrapped me in a massive arms. I did the same, and we stood there for the next minute, locked in our mournful embrace. In an instant, we released one another, and I bid him goodbye.
After high school many years ago, I was in a bad place. My guardian had kicked me out after graduation. She didn't help me find a place to stay, so I lived in my car for a couple of months. I met some heavy metal dudes at work one day. I'd seen them around town, and all my other friends knew who they were. Everyone loved them. We became friends over a couple months, and they offered for me to move in with him. I agreed. Looking back now, I wish I had just stayed in my car. My two main roommates were brothers named Andrew and Seth. They were in a band. They also believed in the occult and anything of that sort. I never really believed in that stuff, but I'm not one to tell someone what they should believe. They had let me live with them rent-free for several months, so who was I to complain? Being the only female in a house full of young men, I was always looking over my shoulder. You never know who you can trust, and turns out, I was right to worry. Over time, their friends started to stay with us for longer periods of time, sometimes weeks. Their friends were another group of brothers that they had gone to school with. There were 5 brothers in total, but only 2 stayed with us consistently. The younger brother Mark was very polite. He cleaned up after himself and always helped with the household chores. The other brother Adam had a laundry list of mental problems. He had apparently done some bad drugs back in the day, and he had developed into what seemed like psychosis of the religious sort. He had done time in prison for assaulting a woman with the Bible. He would often look you in the eye and tell you he could see how you would die. Once, he told me that I was possessed by a demon and I needed my soul cleansed. Everyone in the house knew he had these problems, but he was their friend. They helped him through the hard times and gave him a place to stay. Otherwise, he would be on the streets. I was always on guard around him after the things he told me. No one else seemed to be as concerned as I was. They should have been. One day I was sleeping, and my phone rang. I was my boss. He asked if I could come and work an hour early. It was only 12 p.m. I was broke and had nothing better to do. So I said yes. I got up and began getting ready to leave. I walked out into the living room to see Mark and Andrew sitting on the couch, while Adam sat on the floor by the TV. He was watching scripture videos on YouTube, some real end-of-day stuff. That was fairly common. So I went about my business. I said goodbye and left for work. My shift at work was almost complete when the phone rang. My boss answered, handed the phone to me and said, "It's for you." I was just a cashier, so I assumed it was a friend that couldn't reach me on my phone. I answered the phone and heard a man's voice that I didn't recognize. "Hi, this is Detective Williams. Something happened at your apartment today, and we need you to come into the station to talk to you about it." I left work immediately. I had assumed one of the brothers had been arrested for drug dealing or something. I was very wrong. I got to the station and was buzzed in. An officer escorted me to a small, cold room with a camera. He gave me a bottle of water and left me by myself for about 30 minutes. My mind was racing about what could have happened. He came back and informed me that Adam had stabbed and killed Andrew at around 1 p.m. I was shocked. I had just left the house an hour before it happened, and everything seemed fine. I asked if there had been a fight. The detective informed me that there hadn't been a fight, and it seemed to have happened out of nowhere. I gave my statement to the police and left with nowhere to go. Still in shock and confused and in my mind. Our apartment was a crime scene, so I went to another friend's house to watch the news report since the police wouldn't give me any information in the case. Over the next couple of days, the information began to be released. Adam hadn't just stabbed Andrew once, not twice, but he had stabbed him over and over and nearly decapitated him. After the murder, he ran down the road, still holding the murder weapon. He called 911 and informed them what he had done. I watched the news report in horror. We had known he was unstable, but this had fully confessed to the brutal murder and provided police with his notebooks. He had apparently planned to murder all of his brothers, my roommates, and me. He thought we were possessed by demons, and this was the only way to free us. Luckily, none of his other intended victims were there that day. Mark unfortunately witnessed the murder, but he was lucky escaped. If I hadn't gotten that call from my boss, I wouldn't be alive today.